This is NHTV2, North Haven Government Television, a service of North Haven Community Television. The following program is brought to you through the support of the Town of North Haven.
I'd like to call our Tuesday, March 15th Special Board of Finance meeting to order. We did have a shift in date to accommodate presentation of the CAFR. But before we get there, first item, minutes of September 16th meeting.
No.
Everyone's had a chance to review it.
Did you say September?
Yeah, you said September.
I'm sorry, February. Everyone's had a chance to review it. Any questions or comments?
Yes, I have three quick things. First of all, in the agenda for that meeting under old business, there was none. So I think that the minutes should stay the same. So rather than having update on fiscal year 2022-23 budget, it should say none. And you really shouldn't be announcing the workshops during the actual meeting, right? Because that's not part of the meeting.
I'm not following whatsoever.
Okay, so I have a copy here of the actual agenda for last month.
Okay.
And under old business, it
There
says
is none
none.
listed. Okay.
None. So in the minutes, when you get to the section where it says old business, it should say none, correct?
There's nothing listed there. That's not sufficient that there's nothing listed there?
No, it says update fiscal year 22-23 budget. Mr. Monaco said that following tonight's meeting, a budget workshop.
Okay, so amend it. What else was there?
Okay, so that's point number one. Point number two, either before or after Mr. Frieda's comments under new business, I would like to add Nancy Barrett shared information about fire department staffing costs with the board members. Remember I gave you all a model?
Well,
It's technically not recordable, though.
what's that?
Why is that not
recordable item.
recordable?
The minutes are designed to give a recap of what was this, of our agenda and any votes taken.
Well,
I mean, I
if
don't have a
Mr.
problem
Frieda's
I
comments
do
are-
not have a problem putting it in, but,
Right. It's under new business, so just as Mr. Frieda's comments are recorded, I think that my comments should also be recorded. Does anyone have an objection?
Yep, I'm okay with it, with making that change.
I guess one of the comments, there wasn't any comments on the staffing. You gave us a model, which I know.
Yes, that's all I'm saying, is that I shared with the board information about fire department staffing costs. That's it, I shared with the board members, that's all.
There was no information on the staffing costs, right? It was a model.
It was a model,
Which-
and I have a copy of it if anyone would like to see it again.
Which used a dollar as a basis, right? So it was
Exactly.
intended, I think, eventually to show, I guess, the full burden, right?
It was intended to put some numbers to the proposal made by the fire chief for an 11-man staff.
Correct.
Right. So, if there are no objections, that's point number two.
you got something else?
And there's a point number three,
I
yes.
think for Tammy's sake, you ought to probably
I,
say exactly what.
Should I repeat it?
How do you want it worded?
Sure. During, or in the section that says new business, either before or after Mr. Frieda's comments, it doesn't matter, Nancy Barrett shared information about fire department staffing costs with the board members, period.
shared her interpretation of staffing.
No, it's not
your
my interpretation, it's a model that I shared with the board members. There's no interpretation, it's a model.
Yeah, so,
It doesn't have any information on the staffing costs, right? It was a model designed to perhaps show the full cost of staffing, right? But there was no information on the staffing costs. I'm trying to find it, Nancy, I can't see it.
I have a copy of it here if you'd like to see it, but
I guess I have a problem if you want to say that you,
I shared information with the board members.
a model, say share a model.
I, happy to say, shared a model, a financial model. That's what it's called, a financial model.
and what was your third item?
And then the third item, I was wondering if Mr. Frieda might want to change the language in his comments, or in the summary of his comments under closeout of fiscal year 6/30/21, where it says, Mr. Frieda made the announcement that the position of Director of Finance Administration will be restructured and replaced with two positions, a Comptroller CPA and a Director of Administration and Procurement. So, in my opinion, the budget that was handed to us last month actually contained both the Director of Finance position and the Director of Finance Administration. So, in my opinion, those two positions were in the budget, and then Mr. Frieda is announcing he is eliminating the Director of Finance position, and he's adding another position. That's not the same thing as I'm going to replace this one position with these two positions. Does that make sense to anyone? You already had two of the three positions in the budget.
Yeah, I'm not
Yeah.
following what you're saying, but the bottom line is I am restructuring the department. So there'll be no Director of Finance.
I understand that.
There will be a Comptroller CPA, and there will be a Director of Procurement and Administration. So I'm not going to change that.
Okay. Okay,
So-
I just feel as though the way it's written here, it's not very clear,
Okay.
because in
I think
effect.
board members were clear with what his meaning was and understanding of what he said.
But I have no problem adding what Mrs. Barrett wants, because I look at it this way, folks, and be very candid. With all the issues that I'm faced with right now, these are
Absolutely.
such minor issues, I have no problem adding that.
Right,
We have a lot going on in this government.
absolutely.
That's a lot more important than adding a couple of sentences or changing a couple of things. Got to look at the big picture, Nancy.
I always do as well.
Well,
And-
that's
and
kind of small picture right there.
This is a historical record, so it's not just for the purpose of informing this board, but rather informing the public, not just today, but in years to come. I want them to be able to look back at this and say, this is actually what happened.
So add her comments. I'm not changing the comments I made.
Okay,
Okay, so,
thank you for your time.
okay.
I'm moving
Second, as amended. Second,
Second.
all in favor?
Aye. Okay.
Expenditures.
Time for the monthly reports, huh? Okay.
Michael, well, you know what, since we're trying to move tonight along a little quicker, does anyone have any questions on expenditures?
Yes,
Yeah, I do too, a couple.
please, go ahead, Diane.
All right, so I know we talked about this, but maintenance and repairs, page 7, central facilities, it looks like we're encumbering more. So if we're encumbering more, then I'm assuming that we know something else needs to be repaired?
All right, so what page are you on, Diane?
7.
All right, so page 7.
Central facilities, maintenance and
Yeah.
repairs.
So we just had to put a new roof on here for $42,000 on Town Hall. That's a big part of it right there. So that's because we were getting rain in here. And you can't have a building, a public building, where it's wet and there's areas that the roof has been defective. If we didn't take care of that roof, there was a chance that a portion of that roof probably could have collapsed. So that's one reason. That's repairs and maintenance. The second issue on that line item is that we're encumbering about $3,700 to help the registrars. We're putting in a security gate there. They're the first point of entry when you walk into Town Hall before you get to the receptionist. So on the right-hand side, the registrars have asked for a security-type door and gate. I've authorized it, and that's what we're doing there, so.
Okay, and I got one other minor thing.
Excuse me,
Yeah, go
I'd
ahead.
like to add to
Yeah.
that. 5 of the 8 departments that have line item are over budget.
It's a really important point.
And that next year's budget will increase that line item and department. Because it seems like we do have a lot of maintenance and repair on these buildings.
Well, I'm hoping, Jim, that a lot of these are one-timers. We're not going to replace the roof here. We're not going to replace that security door. So some of these are one-time maintenance items that have been deferred down through the years. So, but I understand your point, and we'll see how it plays out.
Okay.
So,
You said there was another?
Yeah, there was another, it's kind of minor, but it just kind of jumped out because it was minor. So on the same page, the assessor, like we we more than doubled the grand list paper.
Yes, good point.
So while it's small, it just jumped out at me.
Well, I think that's an example of what we're faced with here. There is an inflationary environment on several things, fuel, gas, and others, and I think that's what's happened right there. Costs are going up.
So I think the assessor talked about one of the vendors was increasing their
Yeah,
charges.
right.
But this looks like it's actually the paper that's used
Yeah.
for the grand list. And it just seems like $5,000 for paper seems a little bit excessive.
And to add to that, again, these office supplies, I know we've discussed this
Yes.
in the past.
Exactly.
Again, many of the departments are well over budget. It's a small amount of money, but they're over budget, and I'm hoping in the new budget that they apply to a higher rate.
Well, what we've tried to do in a budget with 400 to 500 line items is, we know there's going to be line items that go over. And we know there's going to be line items that come under. So the key is to ensure that the bottom line number is not overexpended. Any line item over $20,000, we go to a town meeting in September. So there's mechanisms in place for the explanation. So when I look at this, I don't look at $500, $600 over. I'm looking at the whole budget and the vision of, all right, where are the line items that are going to come under, knowing that some are going to come under. It's impossible for 400 to 500 line items to have every line item come in at the same dollar amount.
Yeah.
So that's something that I'm managing right now, so.
Right. And maintaining some of the smaller line items at the same level gives the department heads a target to shoot for, to try to conserve on costs.
Right.
Good point, Michael. Anything else, Di?
No, just clarification on 14, when we talk about track and field facility maintenance, what is that? Page 14.
Yeah, so that, CreateScape has the contract, and many times if the school system or someone needs something added, something done, if there's, let's say, damage because of a storm or trees, they have to go out there, and some of these items are over and above the contract itself. So there's a lot of maintenance on that field.
So it's schools, it could be schools?
Could be schools, yeah, it could be school athletic events. There could be, I'll give you an example, a tornado, there were trees strewn over the field, there were leaves all over the place. So these are maintenance things that have to be done, you just can't leave it the way it is.
Okay, so, because it's not talking about like the actual Vandercourt track, this is other things, or is that part of it too?
No, the track that's a whole separate.
That's a whole
subject.
separate, okay,
Yeah.
I needed clarification,
Right.
thank you.
Yep.
Anyone else?
I just want to also add that the fire department has a $32,000 encumbrance also under the building and maintenance repair line,
Thank you.
which is already over budget.
Yes.
So that, I'm not asking for an explanation, I'm just saying that, Jim, I understand your concern on those, and we do have to keep an eye on it and make sure that,
So where are you, Michael? What's that?
that's page
10?
10. It's page 10, yeah. Yeah. Make sure that we budget properly, but it is true what Mr. Frieda said, that if some of these items are addressed, they don't have to be readdressed.
Well, that's a good example, what you just brought up, the fire department. So we had 2 overhead doors at a couple of stations that had to be replaced. Now consider this, to ignore that, and there's a fire, you can't get a fire truck out, that's a top priority.
Wait, that happened on one of our newer buildings? The
Well,
one- the
they're all
buildings
new
we just built?
They're all new buildings, so, I mean, in the sense that they've been built the last 7 or 8 years. Plus, and this is what the average person doesn't realize, and I can't expect the Board of Finance members to realize this either. You take something like that, we gotta get that done, because if we don't get it done right away, then we have a real problem. And then in terms of the SBAC, or the air packs, those had to be addressed, they were defective. So when we see these items that pile up on maintenance, they have to be done.
Did the old doors have a lifetime warranty?
No.
Well, I mean, there's a warranty, Michael.
Because Anderson will replace it.
Those
So,
doors are-
you know, I say it's a one-time expense, I'm positive that when you replace those doors, that they're not gonna be failing next year. So these are things that happen during the course of the year.
Okay. Yeah, and the other item that is continually over budget is is all the public works overtimes, but again, that's due to storms somewhat, and that's been compensated to us somewhat through FEMA.
Yeah, well, it was due to storms, and then in the major snowstorms, we had to hire outside contractors,
Yeah.
okay, to supplement the plowing, so that's part of that too.
Right, and I noticed that in our proposed budget, some of these overtime lines have finally inched up, we've added to them a little bit.
Yeah.
So that's good foresight. So you have to thank Ellen on that. No, thank you, sir.
Anything else on
So
expenditure?
to combine the points that have been made this evening, I just wanted to point out that the maintenance and repairs for all town buildings is $100,000. Now, we're over, but that's for all buildings. And for the fire department, it is pretty comparable. And again, they tend to be over on 4 buildings. So I think it would be useful to this board to get some sort of, it doesn't have to be every month, but some semblance of what's going on in our town. And I understand there are old buildings and there are things that need to be taken care of right away. I get it. But again, if we're talking about relatively new fire buildings or newly renovated fire buildings within the last 5 to 10 years, then I think that there has to be some sort of explanation on a regular basis for how we could possibly be spending over $100,000 on 4 buildings.
Well, I think, coming back to what I said earlier, and I can't expect anyone here to know this, okay? So this is not a criticism, this is an explanation. So on our calls for service for the fire department, let's say they go to a fire, the laundry is included here. So we're doing laundry, we're making sure that everything's clean, the uniforms. I mentioned about the air packs, laundry, overhead doors, as I mentioned. There were COVID-related expenditures that we had to augment for the fire department during the last few months. So all those are in that line item.
You're talking about the $95,000 line item for maintenance and repair? Which line item are you talking about, Nancy?
So I'm comparing.
I'm looking at fire. Which line
Central
item?
facilities, maintenance and repairs for town buildings, which is budgeted at $100,000, and comparing that to the maintenance and repairs for the fire department, which is
$95,000.
95. In my mind, comparable, right?
No, because it's building maintenance and repair.
And building maintenance and repair. What am I
Well,
missing?
we've got building maintenance and repair on other, like public libraries.
Yeah.
$35,000, right? Right, they have their own line in there, right?
Yep, they do.
You're saying the air packs are in that building and maintenance?
Yeah, there's.
Yeah, you have to be
Equipment maintenance, yes, equipment.
sanitized.
Yeah, that'd be sanitized.
No,
So it's
building
not
inspector.
directly billed.
There's other things in there.
Other things within
Right.
this line.
That's why I
There's-
mentioned, I can't expect you to know that.
You
so
have,
I'm-
you
I'm
have to
sharing it.
realize too, the fire department has backup generators in every building that are maintained and repaired.
And they're brand new. Right?
Being brand new doesn't mean you don't maintenance on it and repair it,
Well, then they're under warranty if they're brand new, right?
but it doesn't give you maintenance.
But look,
You change the oil in your car every 5,000 miles.
I do.
Why, isn't it
It's not
under warranty?
$100,000, I can assure
But
you.
isn't it under warranty? I mean, the same thing.
Right.
Anything else on expenditures?
Yes, I just wanted to ask about disposal of recycled materials. Again, we're up at,
We're paying during that.
sorry, page 11, bottom, very last line, disposal of recycled materials. Any insights about that, Mike?
Yes.
In terms of,
yeah, unlike what we have at, I'm sorry?
sorry, go ahead.
So give me the question again, Nancy.
Oh, sorry, I just wondered, we're currently at 97% for disposal of
Yeah.
recycled material, so
Yeah, so what's happening with that is.
what's happening with that?
Down through the years, we never had to pay to dispose recyclables. We were actually getting paid. We had a revenue of about
Yes.
$8,000 to $12,000 back then. But as things changed, there was a tipping fee associated with the disposing of recyclables. And unlike the fact that we're stable on our municipal waste tipping fees, the tipping fees on the recyclables have gone up. and that's why that number is there. So there's been an increase in the tipping fee on recyclables. Tipping fee is the disposal cost.
Yes, and we've talked about this in the past, and a lot of it had to do with the disposal companies cannot get rid of it in the same places they were,
Right.
which was China and,
The other thing we saw was on Elm Street, particularly during the pandemic, people wanted to get out, and they were disposing more recyclables over at the recyclable center. So the way that works is, once those are filled, John's Refuse comes, picks it up, takes it out, brings a new bin back, so there was a little bit more frequency and a little bit more recyclables back then.
Right. But the tipping fees, Mike, I think I pointed this out before, is actually under sanitation. So that's a separate department, separate line item altogether. So this is transfer station recycling.
Well, yeah, the tipping fees have gone up on recyclables, but when we look at the disposal fees, as I mentioned, there's more utilization of recyclables, increasing the frequency of them having to be not only disposed. I use the Elm Street Center as an example. John's Refuse has to come more often, and that adds to the cost.
And with the streets and roads, the point that was made earlier about the overtime, I just looked historically, and overtime for streets and roads was at 142, 135, and then all of a sudden in 2021, it went up to 284. And then this year, we're currently, year-to-date expended at 244. So,
What happened in some of the snowstorms, people's trash and recyclables were out there, and we had to make a judgment call. The trucks couldn't get around in the snow, so we would occasionally, happen a few times, we would tell the people, keep the trash and recyclables out there, and then what we would do is authorize, this was a Friday route in particular, this happened a few times, because we picked this up every day. So I authorize the overtime to help the people get the trash and recyclables out of there by having Saturday work to do that. And that happened this year.
A number of times, because I'm not Friday pickup.
It's so
So you
much.
and Friday pickup.
So much.
So you got picked up on Saturday, right?
Right.
I'm the guy that authorized it, or else it would have stayed out there, you would have had to bring it back,
Yeah.
back to
No,
your garage.
no, fine.
So,
So we just pay some more people. That's all.
okay.
and one last question that I have is under, what is this, parks?
What
The-
page?
Sorry, page 14, the $25,000 encumbrance.
Page
Well,
14.
that's what I asked about.
Yes. So is that specifically for resurfacing, or is it just for trying to get it ready for the spring
That's
season?
what
No.
Michael just answered that. That's
Yeah,
what
it's
Diane
not the
just
track and
asked.
field, it has to do with
Yeah.
schools, athletic fields.
Oh, so it's the whole category?
Yeah,
It's-
yeah.
Sorry, I misunderstood exactly what the
Yeah.
answer was.
That-
I
yeah.
wasn't sure.
That's what I was explaining about.
Right.
Yeah.
About the debris, the leaves, the trees, whatever it may be, so.
Anyone else have anything on expenditures?
A quickie here, just, you don't have to turn the page for it. The town pension accrual, it's an accrual. Do we pay that out 1/12 each month? Because it doesn't seem to correlate to that sum, and it appears as though,
What page is it on, Mike?
no, it's page 17.
17.
Yeah. 5758, the last four digits, 5758 in the pension and social security section. Yeah, that line may end up being a couple $100,000 over or more by the end of the year if we keep spending $200,000 per month there.
I don't know how we pay it. It was
Yeah.
expressed as a percentage of payroll, Mike, and
Yeah.
that might make it a little more lumpy.
Yeah.
Maybe Mike, I'm sure I was inside that.
Yeah, so,
So it's not a direct even payment
no.
on a monthly basis.
So what you see there in that category is the actuarial analysis of what we should contribute, okay? So I picked up a problem after Ed passed away, where we were funding pension as a percentage of payroll. And what that didn't account for was the percentage of payroll was less than the actuarial analysis, because the actuarial analysis was based on the number of employees in the table of employment. So many times during the year, we have open positions. So I corrected that. And I think that's probably part of what you're asking. The bottom line is, we're gonna be in line with the quotas, the budget.
Oh, really? Okay. I didn't know if the number was set based on the incorrect direction we were taking.
So the numbers, we have to comply with what is in that budget, in this budget. And this budget is based on what Siegel tells me and had told Ed and I what to put in,
Okay.
okay? So
Okay.
I don't see us overspend or putting more money in than what we need to. We did that a few years ago. We put in another $525,000, and some people weren't happy about it, but that was a good thing. The rating agencies really look
Yes.
favorably on that, but this is where we are in here.
We had
Okay.
some great returns, and
I was just saying, you know, if that last month's rate, the or payout continues,
I understand.
the budget number cannot be met.
I understand. So-
Okay, thank you.
revenue?
Yes.
Special funds.
Wait, no, hold on. Don't rush.
Mike, what was the miscellaneous, if you know, the 145 that came in this month?
What page is that, where?
Page 2, first one.
Page 2.
That's one of these categories. I'm not quite sure, Tim, actually. Okay.
Keep opening the mail.
That's good.
The FEMA money that apparently came in this last month?
The 10,000?
No, that's year-to-date. So this month, it was 5,362?
Mm-hmm.
What was that covering? Is that,
That was.
Installments?
That was a payment from, the federal government changed the rules from a 25% reimbursement to 100% reimbursement. That was what we were owed as a result of the calculated difference between the two. It was another payment that came in, and that's what that is. Okay, that's what that is.
but this was not budgeted, obviously, because it
Not right.
says,
It's not budgeted.
says
It's not
zero.
budgeted.
Okay. And again, we now have both of the one-time revenue sources, both the Covanta and the tipping fee stabilization.
Right.
Both came in a little bit under, but it's
Yeah.
nice that we were at least able to capture the two at,
So let me
roughly
explain that.
90%.
So we came in under on the Covanta settlement fee because, you've heard me say this many times before, so forgive me for repeating it. As chairman of the board, I had an obligation to bring the municipalities together. And that was the original projection. Covanta came back through the attorneys with us and tried to renegotiate. They went much lower than our original formula here, which was in the budget. We ended up bringing them back up. They came in short for all the municipalities of what we originally thought. On the tip fee stabilization, what happened with that is that because I thought it was important, I got the board to all agree to liquidate that fund as quickly as possible. We probably lost some interest on the money, and some of the difference is what that interest would have been. But nonetheless, at least we got the two revenue items in, because I gotta be honest with you, if I didn't push this for all the municipalities who I'm chairman of on this, we wouldn't have got this money. So it's less than what we thought, but we got two line items in there.
Did we lose any principal or just interest?
No, we lost no principal, no.
That's my question. And again, just looking at the collection of tax arrears, to me, that the fact that we're still collecting this, and if you look at the expenses, both in legal as well as from the tax collector, it still appears as though there are quite a few people that are still hurting in our town. So I just wanted to make that point.
Anything else on expenditures? Rather, revenue? Special funds?
Well, we just got that, right?
I have something on special funds.
Sure, Michael.
I don't know if you want to double-check the figures, but I guess it is possible to pay for the police overtime services there to pay more out in a given month than they were able to bring in revenue. And the ending fund balance for the police line did go down, that corresponding amount, $20,000 at the end of the year, compared to the previous month's report, which means that it's going to be challenging to retrieve the budgeted $700,000 from these accounts by the end of the year. So we'll see how it plays out.
I'll check that number, Michael. Maybe they're reversed. I
Well,
think you're right.
you make a good point. And,
Let's see what happens. It is what it is.
but
you know?
I can tell you this, the reason I've kept it in there is I know for a fact, in dealing with the public utility companies, that there's gonna be more and more work done, which will require outside duty.
Okay. Very good. But it's good for us to be able to oversee and to see any movement in MRSA, in the Board of Ed capital improvement account, and to see how the fire services are doing with maintaining revenue. So I do like this page a lot. Thank you.
Anything on special funds? Board of Ed?
Yeah, there's, Jim and I had a conversation about the electric, that there was a comment, electric rates higher than expected will be offset by lower than expected natural gas and water billings, but I don't see a water line in the Board of Ed budget, so is that something we can just ask?
Yep. Tammy, we'll take a note of that, okay? Can you repeat that for Tammy?
It's on the Board of Ed, the electric fees, the comment, electric rates higher than expected will be offset by lower than expected natural gas and water billings. So what, is that a school? And then, I don't see a water billing line, so I don't know where we reference that. Thank you.
I also have a question, I'd like to know how the electric bill spikes 50,000 in 1 month. I averaged out their months, it's roughly 100,000 a month they spend on electric. This particular month, February, 147. So I'd like to, maybe they can't zone in on it, but it'd be interesting to why it spiked.
Well, they might have been closed for a portion of
that's-
December and January.
Well, that's exactly what happened, right? So they, you had the Christmas holiday season, and then there were still a lot of Zoom classes taking place, and they pretty much reopened now, so I think that explains a large portion of it.
Not in high school.
I have a quick question about the Board of Ed summary, which I like very much. But again, in one of the unexpected costs, it lists unplanned legal issues, both standard and special ed. And then on the second page, it goes on to say, we will continue to monitor the tuition and special ed transportation costs. However, if this balance remains at year end, we will be recommending the board approve a transfer of all or portion of the remaining funds to the special ed reserve for future legal costs. So I just think that this winds up being a little bit of a slippery slope, because we're talking about using surplus funds that have been put into a particular special ed reserve fund and paying for both special ed legal fees as well as non-special ed legal fees. And so I just remember when we all memorialized the Board of Ed carryover fund, which is another special ed, another special fund, that Ed Swinkowski was really adamant about the control over access to that particular fund. And the language that they're using here, including a quote from Amanda Gabriel, saying that, you know, we should just go in and you know, take out this money and we should just use it. I just think that there has to be a little bit more of a regulatory authority, both from our Director of Finance as well as from this board, in terms of saying what the Board of Ed can and cannot do with these special funds. Wouldn't you agree, Mr. Fida?
I agree with you in concept, yes, I do.
Okay.
The reality may be, they may have the statutory right to do that, but conceptually, I'm in agreement.
Right.
I think part of the issue here, well, I know part of the issue is, what happens, and I can't really talk too deeply about this, I'll just give you a broad stroke. In any school district, there potentially could be an issue where parents aren't happy with the quality of the special education in the school, which then requires the Board of Ed to pay for the outsource, which is tremendously expensive to do so. And inevitably and unfortunately, the attorneys have to get involved to try to reconcile that. So that is part of what that narrative is, but I'm in agreement, there has to be tighter
Right,
controls.
but again,
I do.
if it is special ed related,
Right.
that's one thing. But to pay for legal costs that are not special ed related, I think that becomes a little bit of a slippery
Yep.
slope, especially since,
Okay.
there are, state regulations over the use of surplus funds.
I see your point.
And to that point, I would actually really like to have a legal opinion from our attorneys on the Board of Ed access to surplus funds at the end of the year. I meant to bring this up during their workshop, but I'm making a specific request to you, and if Tammy could record
Yeah,
it.
we'll record that.
I would love to have an interpretation from our town attorney, if you'd like to start with Billy Ryan, who's our town attorney, and if he wants to bring in Jeff or anyone else, I'm happy to have them provide us with some sort of guidance about Connecticut General Statute 10-248A.
Well,
Yeah.
let's
Yeah.
let them request it first.
I'm making a request to
No, let
Mr.
the
Friedman.
Board of Ed request to use the funds, and if then we question their use of the funds, then bring an attorney in. Why
Well,
pay for an
I'm
attorney?
saying this based upon what Mr. Wardlow said, in which he basically implied that they have access to up to 2% of their budget. And that's just not, in my opinion, accurate. I think we, as a board, need to decide if and how much
The Board
money
of
they
Ed
have access to.
cannot access a special fund for other than its intended purpose. If they do and it's questioned, that's the time to bring an attorney to make sure that we're on solid ground statutorily with what they can and cannot do. Paying for an attorney to do something that hasn't happened yet.
Okay, so
Doesn't make
we're
sense.
actually talking about two different things here. The first thing was related to the special funds and having some sort of regulatory authority over that. The second thing that I'm raising is the access to surplus funds at the end of the fiscal year. If the Board of Ed is planning on having access to up to 2% of their budget, then I think it is important to get some sort of legal interpretation at this point so that we can provide them with very specific information about whether they can or cannot have access to that up to 2% of their budget. And that is what this general statute refers to. So they're two
If they
different
try
things.
and access the funds, that's the time we should discuss it, not before. I'm still not following. Why bring a lawyer in if they haven't physically tried or requested the funds?
Because they are
Am I missing?
they're planning, Mr. Wardlaw is planning accordingly with the assumption that they have access to that, because he's made this point several times. And I do not believe that they do have unbridled access to up to 2% of their budget, assuming that that is their surplus. So I think we need an answer to that now, rather than wait until mid-June, when they have to vote on what they want to do with the surplus.
I don't think it falls under us, though. It falls
Starting with the
under,
Board of Ed has their own.
Well, I'm going to turn, now Joe happens to see this from all angles, okay? So Joe, how would you weigh in on this?
The statute's pretty clear that they would have to come to you to request it. They don't have access without Board of Finance approval. So there's nothing they can do. So it's gonna come before you and you decide, you don't need a legal opinion on that.
Okay?
That's what the statute is, that's the way it's.
see, we just
Are we
saved,
talking
we just
about-
saved $1,000.
Oh, are we talking about
I doubt it.
Board of Ed prior year surplus funds?
I think
Is
Nancy's...
that the funds we're talking about?
Yeah, I believe that's what you're talking about, right?
Yes, so
Surplus
that was
funds, right?
part two,
Right.
was about the surplus funds,
Right.
because I think they're talking about being able to, as they did in this past year,
Mm-hmm.
to simply transfer their surplus into these special ed into the three different reserve
Right.
funds. And that really should have been a vote of the Board of Ed, followed by a vote of this
Right.
Board of Finance in order to authorize that.
So Joe, just to fill you in on this, so there was about $1,050,000 surplus, okay? So the Board of Ed voted to put it into three separate categories, two of which were a special education fund, okay, to help protect against the volatility of special ed. And the other was a self-insured medical fund, okay? If they didn't do that, both of those accounts could have been vulnerable, and the taxpayers would have had to pay anyway. So it did come before Ed Knight, God rest his soul, and we looked at it and said, well, we need to beef up that self-insured medical fund, because if there ends up being a run on elected surgeries after the pandemic, we're going to need to fortify that account. And then the second thing was on special ed, because it's so volatile, as you well know, across the state of Connecticut. So the Board of Ed voted to do it, Ed and I sanctioned it, and you see that the Board of Finance has, you think that we have to ratify it here?
Well, the statute that was referenced, that Board of Ed contingency fund or the 2% fund, that has to be approved by the Board of
Right.
Ed.
Right, so they didn't vote on it, first of all, just so
Okay.
you know.
All right.
And so it was capital, special ed,
Right.
and medical.
Right.
And that was sort of my problem, was Board of Ed didn't vote on it, and we didn't vote on it. And it says very clearly, as Mr. Centofanti pointed out, that it is the responsibility of the budget-making authority. That's us.
But that's just for the contingency fund, not for internal service and not for capital. It's just for that specific fund, that statute you reference is a very specific thing.
I agree.
The other two funds they can do.
Joe, just for because the public's watching, and be very informed, those two funds are what? Explain that they can do.
The internal service fund, they can fund that out of their budget because that fund has been established, so there's a need. The capital non-recurring, again, the town has set up that fund, they can.
Joe.
No, he's green.
Money into
He's
capital
green.
non-recurring also. But the 248 fund, the contingency fund, which they spent last year, that's in this audit, the 557, that fund only specifically requires the Board of Finance approval to put the money in, and then conceptually to spend it. Would require approval, but the internal service and the capital wouldn't require Board of Finance approval, it's in their budget.
Okay.
But to carry the 2%, that specific item requires Board of Finance approval, just that 2%.
Okay. So if there's a surplus of 1%, it still falls within the 2% then?
The 2%
Up to 2%
Yep.
is just the max.
is the maximum amount, right?
But the board can approve whatever they want, they just can't approve more than 2%.
Okay. All right, very good.
Anything else on Board of Ed? Hearing none, can I have a motion to approve the reports as presented?
Make the motion.
Second?
Second.
All in favor? Since you started talking, we're gonna keep you talking, Joe.
Now,
Would
this
you
is
like to
Joe
take-
Centofanti, by the way, okay?
Joe is the town auditor. He will take us through the CAFR.
Yeah. Thanks, Joe.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good job stepping over the wires, Joe. Yeah, good, thanks. Yeah.
Whenever you're ready.
There you go. So let's use this sheet to kind of walk through the highlights of the two reports, the big financial statements, and the balance statements of the audit. And then we'll talk about those two along the way. So the highlights are for revenue reported, capital non-recurring fund, not working. Starting on page 10 of the report is the opinion on the financial statements. The opinion is an unmodified opinion, as we call it, or a clean opinion, so no scope limitations, no problems, no issues. That's always the opinion that you're hoping to get. On page 13 through 22 is the management discussion and analysis. This is a good executive summary of the fiscal year operations, so I recommend everybody read that to get a very high-level view of what happened during the year. So there's a section about financial highlights. It talks about both the top statements and the fund financials, which includes the general fund. General fund, and here on page 20, I'll talk about some of the significant budgetary highlights. The charge of services revenues were under budget by 510. Street and roads expenditures were under budget by 508. So the MD&A highlights the larger ones. All the details of that are on a different schedule in the report. It talks about the operations of each major fund, significant fund, which are up front on Exhibit C and D. The minor projects had positive operations of $3.458 million, and the capital non-recurring had positive operations of the $3,667,000. Most of that was driven by those ARPA funds that we mentioned. MD&A also gives you highlights on capital asset activity. The town has a couple significant projects that were in construction progress, the bridge project, school security, and then for the enterprise fund, for the sewer fund, there was sewer projects of about $1 million. And then it talks about long-term debt, and there's a net increase of $567,000. So general fund, GAAP basis, exhibits C and D, your unassigned fund balance was $8,888,000. So it's 8.23% of budgetary expenditures and transfers out. The net change in fund balance for the year on a GAAP basis, again looking at Exhibit D, is $215,642. And on a budgetary basis, it was $546,857. So
Where's the budgetary number, Joe? Where's the budgetary number?
28.
The budgetary number was $546,857.
Yeah, is that on page 28? That's my question.
Oh, where? Yeah, I don't think that shows specifically in the audit. I don't think that schedule is, yeah, they're separate. So you would have to look at RSI 1 and 2 and do the math. So I'm going to jump to page 2 because I know there were, or let's say page 2, I think of your handout, and kind of walk through where the 215 came from as compared to the reports that you had. So I'm going to do my best to explain this. A lot of this is some governmental accounting of how we got there, but I will walk through this other worksheet and then answer any questions.
This is page 90?
No, the second.
No, the second page.
The second page and to the presentation,
Okay,
just because since I hit the 215, I'm gonna show, it kind of
Where the
mapped out.
215 came from.
Right, how, from where you had reports back in summertime to where the audit is. Again, some of it's a little bit technical, but, so the reports that I started with, revenues were under by 2.9 million, expenditures were under by 753. Those are the reports I think you had back in summertime.
Yes.
So looking at revenues, we subtract out the appropriation of fund balance, because in the reports you had, that was shown as an actual. That's just spending savings. It's not revenue in a GAAP sense. It's revenue in a budgetary expense. So because there was a number recorded in actual there, the 2.9 should have been 1.7 higher. Then we had an audit adjustment for property taxes, and that just relates to reconcile to, based upon our audit work in the tax department, so revenue was increased by 140,000. Municipal grants and aid, the $1.8 million was budgeted in the general fund. That wasn't recorded in the general fund, it was recorded in the separate fund, but that was moved to where you budgeted it subsequent to you getting those reports. There was a reversal of accounts payable, so there were amounts that were recorded as accounts payable in the prior year that weren't liquidated, and part of that is
related to, say, encumbrance accounting. They were recorded as AP, and there's a change for that this year that you'll see.
I have a quick question for you. The municipal grants and aid, I assume this is the MRSA money, the 1.8 million. So that's what we brought in, and where does it show how much of that we spent? Which is 1.3 million.
Spending is in your general fund budget conceptually, because that's, you budget that as a revenue, so almost all your public works expenditures are eligible, just like Town Aid Road. So it's not specific.
But you have expenditures listed here.
I don't have expenditures, I have revenue.
No, your middle column is expenditures.
That's the net number after all expenditures.
This is variances to the original budget, right, Jim?
Yep, I understand, but if you're gonna start with the 2.9 and the.
I'm just talking about revenues. Expenditures are independent. They have nothing to do with this analysis. So there are no changes in expenditures other than the Board of Ed was underspent at 7,355, and you didn't have information because the reports that you get do not include the Board of Ed expenditures.
Continue, Joe.
Audit adjustment for 200,000 as a transfer in. And then there was a change in tax revenues as compared to the report that you received. It was 128,601 lower when I received the trial balances to audit. So an adjustment was made related to taxes. Again, my adjustment pretty much offset that. So whatever adjustment that was, that it was made subsequent to the reports that you had. And then if you look at the revenues, you look at the budget column, the amount of revenues for the total budget is showing 109, 091, 154. Your approved budget was 108, 691, 154. So the document that you had was showing you were underspent by $400,000 more than you actually were, because the budget number was $400,000 higher than the actual approved budget. And that gets you to the adjusted amount, the 134,079. If you look on page 90, that's the last number in the last column. So it's taking you from the 2.9 that you saw to the 103,769. That is the audited amount.
Okay.
And then expenditures, again, the only difference was the reports you have don't have a line for Board of Ed. I think you just maybe assumed they were going to spend all the money, but they didn't spend $7,355. That's on page 992. If you look in the middle of the page, you'll see that they have a positive variance of that number. So the report you had 753, and the report here has 760, 612, and that's the difference is Board of Ed. There were no adjustments or changes to expenditures.
So I have a quick question for you about that, the Board of Ed having a surplus of just $7,000. So the Director of Finance for the Board of Ed said when he had to fill out the forms for revenue and expenditure for the state of Connecticut, he had to back $1 million that he termed as a surplus. So it wasn't $7,000, it was $1,007,000. It's just he was able to move that $1 million into 3 separate special funds. And yet not one dime of that money was actually spent during that fiscal year. So would you call that a surplus?
No. He spent.
I'm asking Mr. Santafanti. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
It's an expenditure of his budgetary money, and he's transferred to a different fund. Again, internal service, that's designed to fund for future claims, so there should be a certain amount of reserve in there. The other funds, I guess the capital non-recurring fund, that's always a recommended practice. If there's extra money, fund capital, not operating. So I do that in my town. If I have extra money, I'm not on the Board of Ed side, but on the town side, because it's already available money, and at least in my town, I know I have way more capital to fund than funds. So it helps manage the tax rate going forward. So those are good finance practices if there is a need. So spending is, again, government is multiple funds, which makes it more complicated. You can't just look at the general fund.
But they didn't actually spend it. They didn't actually reduce the tax rate. They didn't spend it on any services. They simply put it in a fund. It's like if you sent your kid to the store with $10 and they spent $9 and kept $1 in their pocket, right?
Right, but again,
That's not really spending $10, is it?
it's not, but if they're gonna spend $350 on capital, that makes sense that you would put that over there and spend it on capital.
But they didn't spend it, that's the point.
But
It's
it wasn't
just-
spent at June 30, but it will be spent at a future time to solve some capital issues. So from an accounting perspective, everything it's spent. Whether it's physically spent because it's in a different fund is a different conversation. But for general fund purposes, it's spent.
So let me explain something here, Joe, because I see some skepticism here. I want everyone to know how this works, okay? Joe and I went through this audit many times, okay? My original intent was to put federal stimulus money to offset any loss of revenue. Joe advised me that we could do it a different way. This audit has already been submitted to the federal government, and I have a response back from the federal government. Thank you, Mr. Frieda, for your filing. We have no further questions and no other correspondence is needed. So the bottom line is this. My name is on it with the federal government and Joe's. So whether or not we disagree with this, it's a certified public government audit sanctioned by the federal government.
I assume that the consultants also weighed in on this?
The consultants
The
for...
BDO consultants?
Well, BDO will refer to the auditors on this. BDO's role is to work with me to get what you'll see in the decrements later on, to get those approved. BDO, that's their role, okay? So BDO's role is not to do this audit. That's Joe's role in his firm, one of the more prominent firms in the state of Connecticut. BDO's role with the federal government is to clear some of these decrements that I listed here to take capital out. It's Joe's role with me to submit the audit to the federal government, which we've done, and they've agreed with it. So
I thought it was that the consultant BDO was working with you to figure out which ARPA allocations were acceptable to the federal government, both
Yes.
for the last fiscal year as well as for the current fiscal year
Yes.
and for the next fiscal year.
yes, that's true.
Okay.
But it has nothing to do with the filing of this audit.
Well, we used ARPA funds in order to be able to close the budget, right?
But it's
Close the
Joe's
books.
job to express intent on the financial statements, and that's what he's done. That, the BDO is a consultant, essentially, that's what we did. We hired a consultant to help Mike
So as an
wade
example...
through the legislation on how to properly spend the ARPA money.
Right,
So as an-
I just thought that there was a difference of opinion between
No.
BDO and Mr. Smith.
No, there's no difference of opinion, no. So I just want to say this, Joe, okay? So you'll see when we get to the budget that you'll see the utilization of ARPA funds in the revenue. That's what BDO clears through the federal government. So there's two separate roles here. Joe's role, working with me, and the consultant's role, working with me on the expenditures of the ARPA and how to apply it. I would periodically say to Joe, the new rule suggests you can put up to $10 million worth of ARPA funds into general government services. What's your opinion on it, okay? And Joe will give me an opinion, but that opinion is always very useful, but then it's really the consultant BDO that directs me how to spend this money. Okay, there you go.
Yeah, no, that's a perfect answer.
Okay.
Joe, you like to finish?
Sure, so here's the 546 that I mentioned. It's on this sheet of the calculation, which is really should be in brackets. There was a decrease because your revenue shortage was higher than your expenditure shortage, so that's the 546,857, your budgetary operations for a deficit of that amount. On a budgetary basis, there were $1.3 million in encumbrances for this year, and again, last year that type of thing was treated as a payable. This year's encumbrances, so the $1.3 million do not count as expenditures in the current year. They will count when they are liquidated in fiscal '22. So that gets you to general fund operations, 773. If you look at Schedule 1, you will see that amount, which is on page 115. If you look at the first column, third number from the bottom, that's the 773,360. Due to accounting requirements, you have these two other funds that I don't know if you want to consider closing, but they've been there for a couple years because they don't have a revenue source or added to general fund. And then here's the 557, 718. That's the education non-lapsing that's governed by that statute. That money that went in last year was spent during this fiscal year. And then, so that gets us to the 215,642 that we see on Exhibit D, and you also see here on Schedule 2. But the 557 makes it a little bit confusing because that money was in fund balance and it was spent this year that, again, transferred in last year.
Okay. Would you like to continue with CAF?
Okay. All right, so I think I just kind of covered the general fund budgetary basis. Again, that's RSI 1A. So you ended the year, revenues were basically in excess of budget plan of 417 because of the 1307 versus you plan to use 1725, so you did a little bit better there on that. So enterprise funds, the sewer fund, there was a decrease in net position of 416,408, which is mostly driven by depreciation. Again, the internal service funds did have an increase in that position, and there's multiple, and I did, list which the two funds were the education funds where they put some money. There were other funds that had increases, other funds that had decreases, but those were the most significant. Footnotes that the coronavirus contingency note has been updated. Last year kind of talked more about we didn't know what was going to happen and the impact on revenues and that type of thing. And luckily for almost everyone, there was really no significant impact, but the footnote now lists the ARPA grant and some of the education grants that came out of coronavirus funding of what the town will receive in the future. And page 88 is a prior period adjustment note related to GASB 84 fiduciary funds, so that just required a reclassification of funds from fiduciary to special revenue, and that related to like student activity funds. The GASB basically changed how we record them or where they're shown in the financials. So pension, a lot of good news on the pension side last year. So it's some big numbers. Your liability for the employee plan went down almost 9.4 million. Your funded percentage is almost 94%. That was basically funded by increase in fair value of the 12.1, and you had a real rate of return of 25.37 on that plan. Police, similar decrease in the liability of the 4.8. and up to 84, almost 85% funded, and increase in fair value again funded that, and the return was 25.63. Fire, again, similar situation, you're up to 90, almost 96% funded, so hopefully the market holds and these percentages stay for everyone, because you're pretty close to fully funding a couple of your pension plans. The volunteer fire, I think, is a newer plan, a little bit less assets, so the volatility is a little bit more. So you had an increase in the liability because there was some change in benefit terms that increased the liability by the 572,000. Still at 72% funded, although that's down from last year. But the official fund is not funded. There's a decrease in the liability because of an actuarial calculation related to the liability, a difference between actual experience and expected. So again, that's RSI 6A. So those RSI schedules give you a lot of good details on pension. And then OPEB. OPEB you have started to fund, haven't really started funding it yet. So you have 0.5% funded. You have a pretty big liability. The liability did go up 3.7, and most of that's driven by the fact that you're not funding it actuarially yet, so it's something to take a look at. Federal single audit, unmodified opinion on compliance, we had no issues. findings or question costs. We did test 2 programs, child nutrition and highway planning and construction cluster, as they call it. So that was your bridge construction projects. Again, no findings or question costs. For state single audit, same thing, unmodified opinion on compliance. 2 programs were tested, Town Aid Road and then Municipal Grants and Aid. And again, no findings or question costs. I think hopefully we sent out the communication of those charged with governance. That was a couple-page letter. Hopefully it was emailed to you. It just talks about my responsibilities. It talks about estimates. We do audit estimates and make sure they are reasonable. Talks about the disclosures are consistent and neutral, and that we are independent of the town. And the big thing that's out there for next year is GASB 87 on leases, and that basically changes the accounting for leases to be an asset and a liability. So an asset for the right to use the asset, and a liability for what you have to pay for that at present value. So that there'll be some new disclosures and some new lines on the top statements, the government-wide statements for implementation of that. All right, so those are the highlights. If anyone has any other?
We do love your yearly presentation. Anyone have any specific questions for Joe?
Joe, page 55?
Page what?
55.
55.
So this is a schedule of our debt, and several columns off to the right there, you see the balance as of June 2021. And you see the total general obligation bonds, 90 million, which does flip to the next page. I'm curious about the 5.7, the bands, which are described as permanently financed. Why aren't those included in the next page, and what do we need when we say a band is permanently financed?
Okay, so bond anticipation notes are short-term. They're usually 1 year. So there's an accounting rule that says if at June 30 you have bands outstanding and you permanently finance them before the audit's issued, then I consider them long-term because you converted them to long-term subsequent to year-end. It's like one of the...
Okay, so we took a band, we put it out over whatever, 10, 20, 30 years, you're saying, right?
Well, bands are short-term, they're 1 year.
Right, but you said permanently financed, that's subsequent to year-end.
Right, so if you look at...
So do you mean longer than 1 year?
Well, basically you issued bonds and paid off those bands after year-end.
Oh, so these bands were paid at these are the November ones?
Yeah, so in November, so
Yeah,
if
we
you
did
look
the
at,
right.
on page 54 at the top, it'll show you the permanently financed.
Right, I saw that. We issued 5.7 in bands in November. Sorry, we took out 5.7 general obligation bonds in November, right?
Right.
So that 5.7 paid off this 5.7, and this 5.7 for November is on the next page.
Right, because now it's long-term.
Yeah, okay.
It's a real kind of a pain accounting rule,
Yeah,
because it,
okay. And then, it may be in one of the 2 audits, I didn't bring it with me, Joe, but can you comment on internal controls and what you found, if any? I think we all know there's been some other towns around that have had some internal control problems. So could you comment on those for the town, please?
yeah, I think we had, we didn't really issue any recommendations this year because most of them have been addressed, so we didn't have any significant items. I know there's a few minor accounting things at the Board of Ed for like the cafeteria fund and the student activity funds. There's some controls that could be tightened there, but generally in the finance office here, we didn't have any recommendations, so
Thank you.
good shape.
No, that cafeteria thing has been haunting us for years.
Yes, it's been,
Anyone else have any questions?
Yep, I have a quick question. I think it relates to that same section, but the verbiage on page 19 for the bonded projects fund, it said the bonded projects fund net change in fund balance was an increase of $3,458,865. But then the last sentence says that the ending fund balance was a deficit, $92,595.
okay.
I think that relates to your bonded projects, positive operations.
19, second paragraph.
Page
at the bottom.
19, bonded projects fund.
Right, so you had positive operations, but you started with a big deficit fund balance, and so your positive operations eliminated most of the deficit except for 92,000.
Okay.
So if you look at
there
exhibit,
is a negative amount there. So that-
if you look at exhibit page 28, you'll see you started with a deficit of 3.551, and you'll see the 3.458, so the net of those, you still have a deficit. Again, these type of projects, because of the timing of spending and bonding, the fund balance really doesn't mean anything. As long as you only spend what you approve to spend, you end up okay at the end.
I just have a very simple question, which is, what was the total amount of ARPA funds that was used by the town to close out the 2021 fiscal year?
Zero.
Zero.
There's no one.
That's what I mentioned earlier.
You have the whole 3.5
Yeah, he
to
just
spend
went
in
through.
I
fiscal
just
22.
went through that as to what we did.
So the capital non-recurring, this 3,667,744, that was not used in order to close the budget?
Correct.
It's simply sitting in suspension? Or
It's
in the account?
until you approve whatever you want to spend the ARPA money on, you have the whole amount to spend in 22 versus needing any of it to close out 21.
Because we didn't budget any in that year,
There was nothing budgeted
in that fiscal year,
right.
And we didn't use any in that
and
fiscal
we
year.
didn't use it.
Michael just went through that, and Joe just
Right.
took us to the
So,
point
if I
discussion.
can point out one
Sure.
final point here, that it's important from an optics standpoint. Many municipalities, their liabilities are growing and their assets are dwindling. So what you'll see in this CAFRA is that there continues to be a spread between our assets that are outweighing our liabilities. And a lot of that's because of what we've done to improve the town's infrastructure, improve the town's buildings. A neighboring municipality right now is showing about a $700 million gap between assets and liabilities. In other words, their liabilities are outweighing their assets. So this looks good on a balance sheet. Now, they're not liquid assets, but when you have a balance sheet that your assets far outweigh your liabilities, that's a much better position to be in than the reverse, which one of our neighboring municipalities are going through right now. And it's bad optics to have that happen, so we have good optics with that.
Anything else for Joe?
Yes.
Yes, Michael?
Page 19, just the simple calculation that's made of the unassigned fund balance. You do have a sum here for the fund balance, for that unassigned fund balance of $8,888,000. Where can I find or calculate the exact figure for what is termed here the general fund expenditures and transfers?
RSI 1B,
Pardon?
RSI 1B,
RSI 1B.
which is 92,
Is that 150?
page 92.
91, 92.
9192, okay, thank you. And my question to Mr. Frieda is about our bond rating agencies. Do they use the same denominator to calculate the same percentage, or do they use a different reference figure?
Well, it would be whatever the budget is in a fiscal year. Let's say it grows by $1 million, that's the denominator at that point.
Yeah, but I think there's different, sometimes different interpretations or adjustments or inclusions when they make the same calculation.
We're talking about unappropriated fund balance?
We're talking about the percentage measurement of unappropriated fund balance to total expenditures, and in this case, transfers out.
Well, I'm not sure exactly what the question is, but let me say this. When I do the rating calls, they look at the aggregate fund balance and the 8.8 million, okay, that Joe mentioned. They, let's say we have 17 to 19 million with all the funds totaled up, okay? Well, they're going to look just at the 8.23%. So the following year, the next fiscal year, the denominator grows because the expenses increase,
Right.
All right, well, I'm not sure what your question is, though.
Well, the question is, and I think he's mentioned it in a previous year, that there is some flexibility or inconsistency at times about how that percentage is calculated and what is used as a measurement of the unappropriated fund balance.
That was one.
Do you recall that at all, or no?
Unappropriated minus
In some
whatever the
cases,
budget is.
they use revenues. I don't know why you would use revenues, but I've seen revenues used, and I don't know when the rating agencies do the calculation, if they look back or if they're measuring against your budget.
Yeah,
which is-
or would they use expenditures without transfers out? Without,
No, I think the transfers out because it's your total budget. So sometimes they just do it against a budget number. So if they measured you today, they might look at your 22 budget and not your actual. So it might come out lower because your fund balance is still last year's number. So
yeah. Well, I'm just making sure we can compare apples to apples and that we get the percentage right, because we may be looking at that over the next month and a half here to decide how to handle things.
Well, I'm going to comment on that afterwards.
I know,
You're absolutely
yeah,
right about
we'll
that,
get
yes.
to that,
Okay.
right.
Yep.
Okay, thank you for the unnecessary clarification that I asked for.
Are you done? Or you got
No,
something else? Go ahead.
just one other minor item here. Oh, yeah, back to ARPA. Your presentation tonight is being paired up with our end-of-the-year reconciliation for last fiscal year that got pushed off and
Because it's part of the CAFR. It seemed like the best way to explain it to people.
yeah, because of the loss of our finance director and the consideration of using ARPA funds as a revenue item last year. And so, yeah, so my question, so while you're still here, the question is for the first selectman who's made these choices here. You did say no ARPA funds were used. Could any of ARPA funds been used, and why did you choose not to use any?
So it was my original intention to do that, but then working with Joe on the mapping here, he pointed out some other avenues that may be more palatable to the rating agencies by doing it a different way. So we went with Joe's recommendation, and what that did for us is it allowed us more ARPA funds to use in these decrements that I outlined in the budget here.
Could a combination have been used? It was the advice not to use a dollar, not to use any.
Yes.
Well, it was ended up being my decision, but I knew that we had to take capital out of this budget, which we're going to get to in a few moments. So you're going to see this year coming up, there is a hybrid approach because I'm putting ARPA money in the revenue side.
Yeah, well, it seemed that if you did use ARPA money to close out last year, it would have improved our fund balances.
Well,
Is that true?
No,
I don't.
no. It wouldn't have improved the unappropriated fund balance. Unappropriated fund balance, unless you, no. We increase
If-
unappropriated fund balance by
The unappropriated fund balance
200,000
changes based on the
based
the
on
outcome
the
of
surplus,
right.
yes, which was
Surplus or deficit of the previous
250
year.
for argument's sake, 250,000.
Yeah.
You could not put more ARPA money in, I believe, based on the guidance we had at the time. We could have picked up lost revenue, but it would have,
Yeah, what would have qualified to use that as lost revenue? How does that get justified?
So the final rule with the federal government is you can put up to 10 million. We could have put all 7.5 million in. But the final rule is you can put up to $10 million worth of money into general government services lost revenue, let's say,
Yeah.
okay? So, but whether or not it would have added to the fund balance, Joe, I mean, from an accounting standpoint,
well, it may have, but
a different account. It's only in a different account.
But the rating agencies look at long-term, not short-term. So a short-term bump in the percentage and then using one-time revenues to balance the budget is a negative to a rating agency. So to avoid that as much as possible, that's the best strategy. And to push as much of it towards capital and solving your capital issues, those are the type of decisions they want to see, not that you're using ARPA to balance the budget. So if you, by coming up with another way to solve that, you didn't do that this year or last year and this year. So that's a positive from a rating agency perspective. And they really prefer you see you spend as much of that on capital. So, because next year you got to fill that hole. So the advice was that puts you in a stronger financial position from the rating agency's perspective of how you're managing and using that money. So that's where that advice came from, if it was something that was doable.
Well, all right, that's one way to look at it. Within the expenditures listed was a sewer project of over $1 million. That clearly is an item that's ARPA permits to expend the money to be used for.
But-
And that's sort of infrastructure, isn't it? Isn't that
It
kind
is.
of a capital item?
Right, but Michael, you have to understand this, okay? That we have millions of dollars in the enterprise fund. We have an enterprise fund with the WPCA. So to take that million that you see there and apply it to ARPA, when there was certainly enough in the WPCA enterprise fund to satisfy that, why would we do that? We would rather use the $1 million and take it out of the enterprise fund than to spend it on ARPA and reduce our capital. Because everything that Joe is saying to you right now leads into some of my narratives when we talk about this budget. We can't afford to have more red flags with the rating agencies. We have 2 right now, fund balance, and we're using, well, we'll get to that in a moment. But
I mean, in the long and short, Michael's telling you, there's a fund.
Well, this is the kind of discussion we needed to have tonight,
Right.
about the choices you made and why you made them.
well, I hope I'm explaining it. So
Well, there's a lot, this could go on for another hour, and which it won't. But I just had to bring up these topics
Right.
because, you did make some major choices here
Yep.
that,
Administrative choices that were in the best interest of the town.
I don't think it was black and white here. I think it was
well,
gray.
there was a lot of analysis that went behind this. I want to get back to the enterprise fund. Why spend $1 million on
Yeah,
ARPA?
okay, well, that does make sense.
Okay.
If there's a capital fund that's designated for WPCA and can't be used for other town purposes.
That's right.
Then, okay, that's a good explanation.
Okay.
I have a question for Mr. Santafanti related to all of this, which is, if we use ESSER 2, ESSER 3, and ARPA funds to pay for items, this is going forward, both this fiscal year and for the proposed fiscal year, that would have been covered by tax revenue, isn't that effectively considered using federal funds to decrease taxes or the tax rate? It doesn't matter whether we're using it to cover expenditures or capital purchases. Doesn't matter. In the end, that reduces the mill rate. Isn't that true?
Conceptually, absent some other revenue source, but
Just like the money they give us for transportation, just like the money they give us for education, it all
Yeah.
clears through the general
Right,
fund.
I just
and
thought
it's a
that
revenue
Mr. Frieda
item.
several times said that we
Yep.
can't use ARPA funds to reduce our mill rate. But if in fact we are using not just ARPA, but ESSER 2 and ESSER 3 to pay for Board of Ed expenditures, other expenditures in our town, as well as for capital purchases, we are in effect reducing our overall tax burden, correct? And ultimately, we could be reducing our mill rate by the use of those federal funds.
Well, that's true, but that's by,
But
it's
you-
a
wait, you
ridiculous
do realize
amount.
the state of Connecticut gives the town of North Haven money for education, as they do in every
I'm
town.
asking Mr. Santafanti a question. Is
I
it,
do
is
understand
it
that,
true?
though.
Yes, I understand that.
Okay.
I'm speaking very specifically about ESSER 2, ESSER 3, and ARPA.
The ESSER grants are education, so they spend that on whether it be the new positions or computers and that type of thing, but
But yet it's on our town income budget, ESSER 2 and ESSER 3.
It's down as a drawdown, Joe. In other words, we have a revenue item in the budget, that's
Yeah,
what they're
this
gonna
is
draw
outside
down.
cap.
Let me try to answer it, okay? So here's the difference.
Mm-hmm.
You're painting a picture, and I understand, I'm not debating why. you're
I'm
painting it.
asking,
Right.
since we
Well,
have an expert here,
all
I
right,
wanted
well,
to hear his
I'm gonna
expert
try
opinion.
I'll turn it back to him.
Please.
But the difference is this, is that if you spend the money under the federal government approved categories, and it indirectly reduces the mill rate, that's fine, okay? But you can't spend it on pension debt, can't spend it on debt service. There's certain things you can't spend it on. So if you're spending it on, like we are here, approved capital that the federal government has approved, which is what we're doing, as long as it meets the categories, the federal government will not look at it as a direct mill rate reduction because we're not spending it on the prohibited categories. So that's the answer.
No, I understand that it could be done. I guess the question is, your decision was not to use it in certain settings, not because the federal government says we can't use it, but because the rating agencies might ding us if we use it for purchases, expenditures, as opposed to capital. But what I'm asking Mr. Santafonte is, if we use these funds from the federal government in all these different categories appropriately, isn't it effectively using that money to reduce our mill rate?
Like, conceptually, like every single grant the town gets is doing the same thing. Every grant reduces your mill rate because you don't have to tax to accomplish that. So it's no different.
Well, I mean, this year, the current fiscal year, is the only year that I ever remember seeing anything other than the ECS grant listed on our income. So now we have ECS and ESSER 2 and ESSER 3 and ARPA. So that's why I'm asking this very specific question, because in the past, it has really just been a Board of Ed issue. We certainly don't list steep grants, for example. We don't list all of our grants. There's got to be some criteria that we use for which grants we list on our income sheet and which we don't. And so, in effect, we are using this revenue from the federal government, which is not going to last forever, as a means of ultimately balancing our budget and ultimately to reduce our mill rate, potentially.
But it's not a violation, that's my point.
Oh, no, absolutely
Okay,
not.
so-
It's not, I'm not in any way implying it's a violation. I'm simply asking Mr. Santafonte if that is an appropriate use of the ARPA funds or any of these federal funds. If we are doing it appropriately and, following their guidelines, if ultimately we can reduce the mill rate by using this money.
If we're following the guidelines and it reduces the mill rate, like taking capital out of the budget, we're fine. If we apply it to pension debt, debt service, we're not fine. Those two also could reduce the mill rate. So we're applying the money based on the categories that are approved.
Right, and the town qualifies for the revenue replacement. So it's different. The rules are different if you take revenue replacement versus if you don't. You spend it directly under what the ARPA rules are. So once you do revenue replacement, then the rules are different. The only exemptions are the two major exemptions are just pension and debt. They pretty much allow provision of government services, which is about as broad as you can get as what's allowed.
And likewise with the municipal grants, since that is a state funding source. In the past, we haven't been able to access our reserves of MRSA funds, and now it seems as though we can.
Yeah, I don't know about the past. I mean, you get the grant, it was budgeted in general fund, so it was put in the general fund.
Is that where we keep our municipal funds, or our municipal grants in aid?
Well, we're rolling it in as it's in the general fund.
I thought it was a
so-
special fund.
Right. At one time it was, yes. So it was a separate fund.
Yeah,
Right.
the unused
Right.
portion ends up supplementing the special fund.
Right.
So it's both.
Right.
Yep.
So just for minor housekeeping here, the page 7 of our income budget in booklet here does say 1.17 was included
All right,
in.
can we stay with the CAFR, finish the CAFR, then we'll move on to the budget?
Well, no, I'm just saying that it is listed as a past item that was used in last year's budget, the ARPA funds of 1.17 million. So we just take that number and cross that out?
Where do you see that one?
That's this year.
That's,
Budget 21-22.
That's the year we're in.
No, yeah, our budget, not the budget we're doing, but the
No,
current
the current
budget.
year- the current fiscal year,
Right.
yes.
Yeah, that's blank. All right, so this one's blank too? That should be blank? That's actual 2021. That's that's last year's budget. So
Yeah, it's nothing there.
nothing there.
But
But in the
Mike, where are you
current,
looking
in the
for
budget year that we're in right now, 21, 22.
yes,
Okay, all right.
you got it.
Thank you.
You see the, okay.
I did get that, I did get that.
He sees
So, all right, so then the question would be, if we did not want to use any ARPA funds in last year's budget, why have we made the decision to use it in this year's budget and next year's budget?
Oh, I'll share that with you when we get.
When we get to the budget.
Yeah.
Gotta
When we
get
get
to
to
the
the
budget.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's finish with the CAF.
We don't want to tie Joe up on that, but if you have any other questions for Joe.
Okay.
Are we good? Are you good?
I have another question, but
Sure.
it'll
No,
be,
if it has to
it'll be,
do with
no,
the
it'll be
CAF,
for
we're
next,
asking.
it's more related to next year's budget, so
Okay.
I'm okay.
I mean, at Ms. Barrett's point, I mean, in this year's budget, we have $1.1 million pilot. Does that reduce the mill rate? Because we're getting $1.1 million from the state or for pilot? It's the same thing as what you were saying. If no one else has anything for Joe, I thank you for your time, sir.
Sure.
Thanks, Joe.
Thank you.
Thanks, Joe.
This comes
I'll be
up
in
later.
touch, okay? Thank you.
Thank you
Okay.
very much, sir.
Sure. Good night.
Moving on to our,
I love the cheat sheet. The cheat sheet he brought out.
Love the
It's
cheat sheet.
terrific.
our 22-23 budget.
He does that.
I'd like to take this in two different approach, or actually, two different segments. First, expenditures, and if you'd like to speak to anything to expenditures, or if we can just go through the decrement with.
Yeah, so I spent a lot of time on this budget. My goal in the beginning was, even with the Board of Selectmen workshop back in January, to present a no tax increase budget. I did mention at the Board of Selectmen workshop meeting that the rating agencies are watching me and us very closely. We were and have been AAA rated again at one time. So I'd like to start by saying that on the expenditure side, we see some new positions, firefighters, police officers, and assistant town engineer. We desperately need that, as I've mentioned. Our engineer, I have all kinds of drainage projects that I have to get done, and he's just overwhelmed right now. The Board of Ed has put 3 new positions in the budget. So on the expenditure side, the total increase in this budget is 3.7%. So to get it down to 3.7%, you see the decrements I put together. Pull that sheet out if you don't mind. So we will, in these decrements that I've proposed, under capital, everything from fire engine lease, or I'm sorry, from library chiller replacement down to fire engine lease, I have all that approved to take out of ARPA. Working with the consultant, working with the 3rd Congressional District Office. So we're able to take a lot of the capital out, and that'll be applied to ARPA.
I'm sorry, Mike, could you
Yes.
repeat that? From library chiller down to what?
Fire engine lease,
Fire engine lease, got it.
All those items in a row, yeah.
all those items,
Become ARPA items.
Okay.
all ARPA.
Thank
So
you.
they're all ARPA?
All
Okay.
ARPA.
Thank you for
Is
clarifying.
there any rhyme or reason to those that are underlined
No,
in terms of the decrease? I just wondered if
No.
one was
Oh,
from
oh.
MRSA and one was from ARPA or something
No.
like that?
No.
Okay.
No. So I felt that the 96 gallon pails, although that's nice to have, it's not a necessity. So I took $1.4 million out, put that on the decrement list. These two trucks here, when we look at the Peterbilt 520 refuse truck, I took it out because even if we had it in, we wouldn't be able to get that truck for 12 to 15 months. The supply chain's so backed up. So to spend that money and not in this fiscal year's budget, knowing we're not going to get it for well over a year, I took it out, and then I was going to request, I'm not sure if we can do it on the vac truck or the refuse truck, to see if either one of those we could apply to MRSA through a waiver. But nonetheless, We're gonna have to do without the $1.4 million on the 96-gallon trash cans and pull these 2 trucks out. On the top of the page, I took out, reduced the contractual obligations, because now that I'm even more involved with all the union contracts, when I look at the balance that we have in this current fiscal year's budget and what we've spent, knowing that I'm in the process of solving 3 contracts right now, that we had too much in the contractual obligation line for next fiscal year, because I'm going to be settling some of these contracts that were originally thought to be settled next year, which is why we had a higher number in. But because I'm going to be settling some of them this year, they'll apply to the current line item in the budget. Let's say that's $458,000 under the current contractual line item. So that was the rationale for reducing the contract obligations. Now on the tipping fees, the original $1.4 million was based on a calculation that included an increase in the tipping fees from $105 to $110 a ton. So I've been able to work with the hauler, actually the transfer station owner, to make sure that we have $105 as our tipping fee charge stabilized for this year.
So we're locked into that.
We're locked in for this fiscal year. Okay, so I took it down based on what I had anticipated the projected incremental cost would be for that tipping fee. Also, I've been watching carefully our utilization rate, and so I came up with $1.05 million, which is based on a straight line projection on utilization rate with a 5% increase, because when you move into the spring, you know, there's more trash disposed, and took out the extra $5 a ton that I thought we would have to incur. So that's the rationale for that. On the community services side, the original presentation a few months ago was that we're going to hire a director of community services. So we had $100,000 in the budget for that. I'm going to make that a manager of community and senior services. That would end up being in the supervisors union, and that's the same amount, the $84,926 that we see in the comptroller side, because that is part of the supervisors union contract also. So I reduced that by $15,000 plus. Getting down to a total decrement, as you see, is $3,763,000. All the capital has been approved by ARPA. So here's where we're at. The revenues I have from the state, for the first time in many years, been able to get the accurate revenues. You'll see a bump up on what was once called MRSA. It's like $2.2 million now. Pilot, there's a new number in there in the tiered pilot program. So all those revenues are accurate. We've estimated, you know, town clerk fees, building permit fees. I've got about 9 economic development projects that I think I can get done, but that will create more building permit fees in this coming fiscal year. So you see that number in there. But here is where we're at. This is what I want everyone to understand. I look forward to your opinion on this. It's been my goal to have a no tax increase, despite the fact that the town government is experiencing significant inflationary pressures, whether it be fuel, whether it be outsourcing projects. If we have to outsource to put a pipe in or a drain somewhere, the costs are going through the roof, both on the material and the labor side. On top of that, the rating agencies have presented to me, and Ed was with me before he passed away also, that we have 2 red flags right now, 3 red flags, 2 bright and shining stars. They love the economic development, they like the consistent management of the way the town's being run. What they don't like is that on the negative side, or on the positive side, if there's 30 AAA rated municipalities across Connecticut, we score higher in our peer group on leadership, management, and economic development than many of the other 30. We're at the high quartile of that. But we're at the lowest on fund balance. At one point, they were happy with an 8.23%, 8%, because we memorialized that years ago here in the Board of Finance. Now they are pushing me to get to 10, 12, and 14%. The reason? There's so many problems with the municipalities all across the country, even in our local area. We got the state, MARB, taking over some of these cities and towns. And they do not like the utilization of fund balance as a revenue item, which I show here. We're gonna make an adjustment. I made one mistake on this, but we'll get to that. It's not gonna alter the revenue, it's just a shift of revenue between debt service and unassigned fund balance. So it was my feeling that for the people out there in North Haven, with high gas prices, with food costs going through the roof, with all kinds of uncertainty from a global standpoint in terms of how the inflation is going to continue to perpetuate itself, that the value of having a no tax increase, even though we run the risk of losing a AAA rating, the value of a no tax increase is more beneficial to the residents than the possibility of losing the AAA rated status. So they want tax increases also. Believe it or not, the rating agencies want to see modest tax increases, $0.25 $0.5 maybe 6.60 on mills. They do not like the fact that we've reduced the mill rate by 0.47 over the last 3 years. They don't like that. They want to see regular incremental revenue. Why? Because they said to me, Mike, we don't know how long you're going to be here. How's the economic development going to work when you're gone? What if you have a tremendous drop in the grant list? You've got to build up a reserve. You've got to build up your fund balance. You're going to have to raise taxes to create the incremental revenue. So the issue is this. I'm going forward with presenting a no tax increase at the April meeting, but I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on the unintended consequences of that.
I have thoughts. So while I understand what you're saying, but not doing anything with our fund balance kind of hinders us from, borrowing and rating, right? We haven't done anything. If we have to using money, it's going to affect the rating and our ability. So I'm concerned about that when we've been asked to go higher. Plus, I don't think we would be AAA rated anymore if we were to do that. On the flip side, my other concern about what's in here is all these expenses were a point in time. As you said, gas and fuel, and it's been on the news as well. I've seen it multiple times. All cities and towns are struggling with the same thing. So while these numbers are our best forecast, things are still going up. Every day, gasoline, groceries, work is going up. So my fear is if we have that no tax increase and we're not going to solve what's going on in the world that's causing an impact, this budget that we have as we go through next year, my concern is we're going to have a lot more overages. We're questioning things here. We could have potentially a lot more. Look at, fuel for fire engines, police cars, public works. They're out there 24/7 every day, 7 days a week. We have this as of a point in time. Well, if you look at the gas prices, every day they're changing, oil's changing, fuel. I'm nervous about what we have in here, and if we don't do something, then next year I see us in more of having an issue with what to do if we have no tax increases, and the impact could be bigger. That's just my opinion.
Okay.
I mean, nobody likes a tax increase, but I just feel that with everything going on, that it would put us in a worse position next year, because the prices of fuel and everything else has not stopped. It's going up daily, and everybody knows groceries, if you need work on your house, gas, fuel, oil, whatever, there's no end in sight. And I'm not comfortable personally with our numbers. They're our best guess at a point in time for those things, but that has a direct impact on a lot of these departments that support the town.
Thank you, Debbie. You had something to say? Or I was gonna, maybe the approach to take right now, because I agree a lot with what you said, but maybe the approach right now is, you've seen where we're using ARPA money, you've seen where the expense side is. is everyone comfortable with the expense side of the budget, and then we can talk revenue side? Because it seems like most of our concern is revenue side.
No, I completely disagree.
Would you have a problem with an expense side then?
So if you would all turn to page 39 in your budget book. And by your budget book, I mean both the 315 version of the budget as well as the 119 version of the budget, because that's really what this list of declinations is the change between those two versions of the budget. Now, we all got version A and B of the 119, so I'm saying version B of the 119. So if you look at page 39, these are ultimately the kinds of numbers that we vote on, which is the total town government, the Board of Ed number, and then the total budget request. And if you compare, just for the town, the very first row, in the previous budget, meaning the 119 budget, it was 59,954,891. And in the most recent version of the budget, it's 55,857,267. So the difference between those two is about $4,100,000. And yet this list of budget changes that Mr. Frieda has just walked us through totals $3,763,400. So that's a difference of about $300,000.
Yes,
And-
two change.
I'm sorry?
Two change. 200 and some odd thousand, 200 and something thousand.
$334,224. That's the difference. So I guess,
If you remember from last meeting, what we had said when the new book came out to you, that the calculation mistake that the police chief mentioned during his budget presentation was corrected. We didn't write a decrement for it, we just corrected it.
well,
On the
actually,
police
there are
salary
several
line.
things that are left out. There are several things. The elimination of the Director of Finance position is not listed in the decrements. The addition of the Controller and the CPA position is not listed in this list of changes. I shouldn't call it decrements. The police patrolman, the number of police patrolmen is now listed at 40 rather than 43.
That
And-
was the correction we talked about at the time. It went from 37 to 40. They made a mistake and thought it went from 40 to 43. You remember that last
We
month?
pulled that out in this budget, that's already reflected on the police page.
So it went up last year.
So it was incorrectly positioned in one of the previous budgets. We took out the 3 police officers. They had 43 listed, it should have been 40.
So I'm looking at the employment table for the current fiscal year budget under police.
And it was incorrectly marked, is what the police chief told us during his presentation, and last month we made the correction.
Yes, so again, it can be an error on his part, or is it an error on our part?
So go to page 26 for a second, okay?
So in the current fiscal year budget, it goes from 37 to 40.
To 40, right. So it had been 43 in one of the previous budget books.
Yes.
Right.
So if this is the current fiscal year, right? So it went in the current fiscal year from 37 to 40. So if you're proposing 3 more positions, then it's going from 40 to 43.
So go to page 26 if you don't mind, okay?
Of course. 226.
We reduced that personnel full-time line from 43 officers to 40, based on the chief explaining there was a mistake.
So where is the mistake? I mean, I'm looking at the budget that was passed for this year. And I'll look at the budget from the previous year. I'm sure the budget from the previous year is going to say 37. Police, patrolman. So it went from 34 to 37 in the current fiscal year, and you're proposing going from 37 to 40. Is that right?
Not 43.
Okay, all right. Okay, so
Also-
in other words, our current fiscal year budget is wrong.
So, look, I'm talking about this budget, okay? 'Cause you-
Yeah, no,
so you
again,
you made a
the baton
point,
has to be
right.
handed off, right?
So- So on page 26, we reduced the first line by the 3 officers, and then over where you see overtime town projects, a previous budget book for this coming fiscal year showed $60,000 in there, and we took that out. That was wrong. So we reduced the first line, and we reduced that $60,000 line that shows minus 100%.
I see, so,
And that's
again,
what we talked about last month.
I see. Okay,
So there's your 4 million, basically.
And what I also did,
here's my 300,000, you mean?
Or 3, whatever you're
Yeah.
short.
Right.
Brings it up to 4 million.
Again, there were changes in bookkeepers, there were changes in senior clerks in the finance department, there were lots of
but this
changes.
is what the budget process does, there's an
I
evolution.
understand. I
mean, you
understand.
can't go back to a budget book in February and go to that, this is the latest. That budget book in February should be disregarded.
This sheet, what does it say at the top? Increases or decreases from budget book 119 to revised budget 315. That's what
But
this
there,
sheet should be.
but there are other changes, subtle changes, as an example.
Yes.
With the 40 officers, what I also do is reduce the FICA contribution, so some of those other numbers have gone down. You know, I don't need to add that on that decrement sheet. This is kind of a decrement sheet. So we did some other changes in here to get down to the 3.7%. So the bottom line is, this is the budget with no tax increase.
Okay, so I have gone through this, as I'm sure you have many times, with a fine tooth comb, and I have come up with not just reductions, but also a couple of increases on the town side, and as well as a minor reduction on the Board of Ed side.
Okay.
And to Diane's point, I think if we're really concerned about the future of our town and expenditures and things that we may or may not be covering, I think this is not the time to add 13 new positions on the town side of the budget. Because those are not one-time expenditures. Those are long-term, you can call them investments, but ultimately they are very expensive expenditures that will only increase, not only in terms of the salary, but all of the benefits associated with them. And again, I'm not suggesting that we should be cutting all of those positions, but I'm just saying that in the grand scheme of the points that you were making, if we're really trying to keep not just a flat mill rate, but perhaps maybe even a reduction in our mill rate that gives us a little breathing room. Because again, we have no crystal ball as to what our building fees will be doing in the spring. We can keep our fingers crossed, but currently they're, you know, at about 45%.
All right, so
And the fire fees are at
I'd like to
29%.
hear
Yes,
what your
what-
proposals, what are the cuts you
I-
propose?
Can I just bring up a
Sure, of
point too?
course, yes,
So
absolutely.
the other thing I didn't mention is, we also have to, another concern is, the Board of Education is adding 3 positions
Yes.
because they had grants. So now
Yep.
the grant's over, so we're adding 3 more positions. So it's not, there's growth there too. So that's another concern, okay?
Absolutely.
So I just wanted to bring that out, because I didn't say it, and I see where you're going,
13 on the
so.
town side and 3 on the Board of Ed side, absolutely,
Okay,
we're
just
in
wanted to
complete
make
agreement.
sure,
But
clarify.
before I get into I just had one quick question. You mentioned your confidence in the MRSA revenue increase from 1.8 to 2.2. Are you also confident in the Quinnipiac contribution of 300? Okay. And.
Nancy, stay on the expenditure side. What are your suggested reductions on expenditures?
Sure, I'm happy to take you through them. Okay, so on page 21, legal fees. Legal fees, judgments and claims, we're currently at about $135,000. So I just, again, we're proposing increasing it from 130 to 160, which I think is a pretty big jump. So I proposed a pretty modest reduction to 150, which is a $10,000 decrease. And that same line, blight, again, I would, it's being kept at 22, but again, we're in the past year, we only spent about $13,000. So again, I'd recommend reducing that by about $5,000. With the library, also on page 21, the maintenance of equipment, again, this was the whole presentation that the Director of Library Services gave to us. And I am completely in support of upgrading both their technology and their printing services, but I'm not necessarily supporting the notion that the library should be a hotspot reservoir or that they should be giving out various types of electronics. So I recommend reducing that. You know, they're jumping from 1,300 up to 7,000. So I proposed giving them 4,050, which is a reduction of about $3,000. Again, books, magazines, and reference. I'm certainly a huge advocate of the library, but they're recommending jumping from 85 to 105. So I would propose 95 again because they've only spent about 73 in the.
And what item was that, Nancy? What item?
Sure, of course.
No, what item?
Books.
Books.
Okay.
It says books, magazines, and references.
Okay.
It was jumping from 86,000 up to 105, so I'm recommending reducing that by about $10,000.
Okay.
On page 22, the next page, this is to me a little bit confusing, but so I think there's some questions in here as well as a proposal, but for part-time, we still have only, if you look at the employment table, there's still only 3 people, but for whatever reason, it's jumping by 500%.
Yeah, I can explain that if you like.
Okay, please.
So we have, with Ed's passing,
Yes.
and me jumping into the role as Director of Finance, we have 3 very valuable part-timers.
Mm-hmm.
Ellen Dufour, Rose Triano, and Marilyn downstairs.
Yes.
And I've added, I have increased their part-time hours to assist me in some of the smaller details. So that's why we see that number. But what was your proposal to cut that back? How much?
So again, you know, last year we spent about 32 on that. So I basically doubled it and I said, let's make it 64. Is that too much of a cut? I don't really have a, because again, it's not overtime, it's just increased part-time. So I was reducing it from 114 down to 64, which is a $50,000 cut. Again, I'm just throwing out numbers because I didn't really understand the context here, but I also understand that there was quite a bit of changing within that department, not just in terms of, you know, clearly Ed's loss, but other things in terms of reducing, what was it, bookkeeper
Right.
3 went from 1 to 0, bookkeeper 2 went from 1 to 2, so there were, and then there was 1 senior clerk that was also lost.
Right.
So there was a lot of, you know, at that level kind of jostling around of positions, so I wasn't sure whether any of that would also cover these 3 part-time positions.
Okay.
Was there anything else?
So, and again, in that same category, under treasurer, finance, under legal ads, I assume there are other things there. It says perch and purse. I'm not sure what that stands for, but again, you're recommending keeping it at 6,500, but in fact, last year you only spent 4,500. And again, I thought the argument for increasing the bidding threshold up to $25,000 was to reduce legal ad expenditures. And it was, as I said, it was only 4,500 last year, so I'd recommend dropping that to 5,000. So it's only a $1,500 savings. Okay, page 22, to Diane's point about the assessor. I never have comments about the assessor's office, but here, this is another one of these cases in which I was very surprised by not just the cost of the paper, but in this particular case, the professional appraisal service, where we're recommending, again, keeping it at $15,000, and I happen to look back historically, and we've spent between $5,000 and $7,000 on that particular line item in the last 3 years. So I recommend, I proposed $8,000, which is a reduction of $7,000 total.
Well, that's for appeals, right? That's where that comes in?
Yeah.
Professional appraisal service, I'm not exactly
I'm
sure.
assuming that's appeals of assessments, right?
No, that's, as an example, when we sell property, we have to get 2 Blue Book appraisals, okay? Or Gary has to have an appraiser go out and maybe look at a new property being built to get an
Yeah.
assessment on it, so that's what that is.
So this particular line item is just consistently under budget. And the reason I'm going through this exercise is if we have to have a reason why we all gather once a month and we pore over the monthly budget books and monthly budget reports as well as pore over the budgets. Because I think we have to learn from our previous experiences as to how good are we at forecasting various line items. And I think looking back historically is the best way to do that.
Now, keep
So-
this in mind, 'cause I want to hear the rest of your comment.
Yeah, absolutely. I
Keep this
just
in mind.
want to go
When-
through all of these.
When we have overages like this, they help us, in other words, when we have
I understand.
underages,
I
they help us
understand.
on the other side, too.
Absolutely, and again, I think the overages are things that we should learn about too, so that's why I have a couple of line items that I want to bump up, because I think we're underfunded,
Okay.
so, but I'll get to that. Okay, again, this is a relatively small item, but on page 23, under tax collector, postage and tax system, I think Stacy was asking for a bump up from 40 to 42, but once again, I looked at this historically, and, you know, last year we only spent about 31, and currently we're at about 29. So I'm recommending $35,000 for this particular line item rather than 42, so that's a savings of $7,000. And if she is in fact short, I think she can use the $1 fund that she brought to our attention, because it seems to have a $15,000 reserve. So that would be my recommendation for tax collector. On the next page, central facilities. Under cultural center, again, I think we've done a lot for this cultural center. You put on a new roof, you've done a decent amount of maintenance. So I think that we should probably just keep it at $5,000. There's a proposal in this budget to increase it from $5,000 to $10,000. So I'd say let's just keep it at $5,000, and that's a $5,000 savings. And likewise, in that same category, maintenance repair of town buildings. This particular one, I think, is actually underfunded. And so I think there's a recommendation to increase it from $100,000 to $125,000. And my recommendation is to actually increase it to $150,000. So that's an increase overall of $25,000. Let's see.
I'm sorry, Nancy, that was maintenance and repair, you want to go to what?
I want to go up to 150.
150.
Right.
Rather than 125. And then on page 25, to Mr. Frieda's point about contractual obligations, again, this is under personnel policy expenses, contractual obligations. As he mentioned, this was already been reduced once by a substantial amount. And I think in looking back at previous years, and the average over, say, the last 4 years, there was one year that was extremely low. But if I kind of rule that out as an outlier and look at the others, I think that we could reduce this by, say, another $50,000 and get it down to $645,000, $356,000. So that's a $50,000 savings. The police department. So, again, regardless of whether we're calling it 37 to 40 or 40 to 43, ultimately last year we added 3 police patrolmen for a half a year. And that cost to the town was $114,000. That was the increase for that line item. So that same group of 3 for the next fiscal year will be there for a full year. And so the incremental increase is for a half year. And then we're talking about adding another 3 police officers for, again, a half year. So that's 6 people effectively at a half year, or 3 people for a full year. So what I don't understand is how we got to this particular increase of $344,000. It seems to me that it really should be just double what we increased last year, which would be 2 times the 114 number. Does that make sense?
I mean, we ran the calculations payroll-wise, making, you know, the half year, the full year, and the 3.5 year, and that's the number we came up with, so. You're talking about the $5,268,090? Is that the number you're looking at?
Under personnel,
Full-time, right?
yeah.
Right. That includes everything baked in, the half years transitioning in and the half years coming up. So,
So
what is your point on that in terms of what you think it should be reduced?
So what I did was I simply went back to the current fiscal year, which again, if you look at the if you look at the employment table, which is on page 42, and you just look across for patrolman grade A, so the error is 40, it should be 3740. That if you just take the current fiscal year amount, which is $2,720,259, and you just added twice as much as we did the previous year, so 2 times 114, which is 228, then you should be able, or let's call it 115, just to make it easier, right? Then I come up with a number of $2,835,259, right? And so that's a pretty big difference from the previous amount. So I'm just trying to understand, it's a difference of about $230,000. So it's not chump change. And so I'm not entirely understanding how we got to this particular number.
Well, I get a difference of 115 on the
3,060,000.
patrolman, right? You got a couple raises here that, to the chief, I guess, and.
Yeah, so.
Right, so you got a couple of things there, but the patrolman line,
Should be flat.
well, I just use your
Because
math.
they have a CBA that's
Using
coming
your
up for
math,
renewal, right?
using your math, the difference is 115.
Yes. So 115 times 2, actually, because.
No, what I meant was, I took your 115 times 2, added it to the 2720.
Yep.
And the difference is 115 to the 3065, right?
That's right. Mm-hmm.
So you think that number should be what, Nancy, then? 2,000,008
So I think it should be 2,835,000, roughly.
versus the 3,065,000?
Exactly.
I don't want to second guess the payroll.
I'm not gonna.
You know, I understand she wants some cuts and some errors, and we can all entertain those, right? But I guess I'm uncomfortable changing the number that we got. It's just, this is payroll.
We can review the number.
Well, look, we can review the number, keep it out of a potential decrement for now. We'll review it again. We went through this 4 times myself in the payroll department, but I won't discount what you're saying.
Okay,
All
I
right.
appreciate that.
All right, so we'll take a look at it, right?
Okay, that's
Okay.
all I can ask. And then on page, go back, page 28, the fire department. Again, I shared with all of you the model, but in the end, the very first line item, I assume includes 2 additional personnel, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so I think there's some confusion, first of all, in the, again, in the page 42 employment table, because it's showing 4 captains, 4 lieutenants, 4 captains, 5 lieutenants, 31 firefighters, and you can't just change the employment table mid-fiscal year, right? We have 4 captains, 4 lieutenants, and 32 firefighters for a total of 40. And I understand that somebody came back from military service and so forth and so on, but in the end, I'm using the handoff of the baton of where we left off with the budget that was approved by a referendum vote, because that has to be frozen in time. And so I'm gonna use that as my frame of reference. And the point that I made in sharing with all of you that model was that to increase to an 11-man shift will certainly not deliver the chief's promise of a $360,000 savings every year. That's not possible, and I think that model shows it. It certainly will not increase fire services to our community because an 11-man shift will not enable him to activate another vehicle. He'll simply put that 11th person on the engine. And so then when a medical call comes in and the engine has to be dispatched, we're not just gonna tie up 3 firefighters at a medical call, we'll tie up 4. And last but not least, putting it all together, I believe that this particular recommendation will cause the fire department budget to grow with no benefit to the taxpayers. Absolutely none. It will simply be an additional expense. And so every time we roll the dice and all 11 men show up for their particular shift, we're losing money because we don't need to be paying for 11. And if only 10 show up, then there is a small incremental savings, but it certainly is not going to outpace the cost of bringing in 2 new recruits that require not only training, but also equipment and benefits. So that's my recommendation for the very first line item, which I believe, again, I'm just ballparking this, is if you take their annual salary, cut it in half, and then you double it again in order to cover benefits, then it's basically about 130.
How do you balance that point of view with the fact that I think we're down to like 27 volunteers now?
Mm-hmm.
How do you balance the public safety aspect of that, knowing that our volunteer houses essentially are dark?
Mm-hmm. Again, I think that if we go to an 11-man shift, it doesn't change anything, right? It doesn't change how many volunteer firefighters we have. It doesn't change how many calls can be received because it's the same number of vehicles. And if the chief's actual plan is to take these 2 firefighters and instead stack them and go from 10 to 12, then that is a very different presentation, because what he promised us at his workshop was that he only needed to go to 11 and that he would be using that 11 to basically affect a cost savings. And so if he's going to try to do what he did before when he went from 8 to 10, then that's a different story. And so I think if any of us buy into the first 2, we are likely going to be on the hook for all 8. Because remember, his original plan was to add 16 positions, right? He was able to add 8, and now he's starting on the next phase. And so if his plan is only for 4, there's no benefit to the town. If he's planning for 8 in order to activate, say, a second rescue vehicle, which of course is in the capital requests, then that is a very different picture financially. And I think we need to be made aware of that. And if he's not making this board aware of that, then I think that that's disingenuous.
You have to take the man at his word. He told you what he was using it for.
Okay, so if it's just that, if it's just the 11, then I hate to use the word wasting, but we're wasting our money. There's no added benefit to adding the 11th person. They're simply going to be added to the engine. It's that simple. With no additional benefit in terms of being able to respond to more calls or
No,
operate
but
more
he's
vehicles.
using the person to fill in for vacation, to fill in for sick time, so he's not bringing someone in at overtime. You had 130,000, what's your next item?
Okay, so I'm happy to go through the model with you again if you'd like, but the model proves
No, not the model,
that
I
he
mean-
cannot deliver on what he promised us.
Okay.
Period. Okay, so the second item for the fire department is under civil defense, which he has carved out down at the bottom there. And in terms of equipment and supplies. And let me go back to that because that's on, what did we say that was, page 20?
28.
Still 28. Okay, so 28. Down at the bottom, equipment and supplies. He is proposing increasing from 32 to 52. And I looked at historically this particular line item, and in the last 2 years, it's been about $7,000 or $8,000. Currently, year to date, we've spent about $2,500 on this particular line item. So feeling a little bit generous, rather than cut it down to 12, I cut it down to 22,000. So that's a savings of $30,000. And last but not least, within the fire department, our favorite category, which is building maintenance and repair. He's proposing increasing it from $95,000 to $115,000. Again, for 4 buildings, only 2 of which actually have people in them 24/7. So I'm recommending reducing that to $100,000, which is still an increase. It's just not as much of an increase as he's requesting. So that's a savings of $15,000. On page 30, engineering office supplies. Again, this is a small change, but there's a recommended increase from $10,000 to $13,000. I looked historically, it's again between $7,000 and $8,000, so I saved about $3,000 there. On page 31, under sanitation, again, building maintenance and repairs. The proposal is just to increase it by $1,000, but we're currently expended at 0. So again, this is the sanitation building, so I can't imagine that there would be too much in terms of building maintenance, but it just kills me to be increasing the budget when we're currently spending nothing on something. And then next page, page 32, transfer station. Disposal of recycled materials increasing from 120 to 150. Again, current year-to-date is about 115. Previously, we spent 143. I think we could get by with 140, but again, I will defer to Mr. Frieda's expertise on this particular issue. Again, if we look historically, in 1920, we spent about 108,000, and in 2021, 143. So, and of course, in 1819, it was free. We actually made money on it. Let's see, parks on page 33. Maintenance of parks, the recommendation is, the budget is to increase from 75 to 95. Again, I would recommend just 85, which is still higher, but not quite as high, and it's currently at 46,000. And again, just in terms of explaining the actual number for 2021, that includes any damage to the parks that were incurred by the August 2020 tornado. So it's not surprising that that number would be very high. In that same category, gas and oil, I know this is a little bit risky at this time, as Diane pointed out, because we all are feeling it at the gas pumps. But again, this particular number just seems a little bit wacky, going from $17,500 up to $30,000, and we're currently spending about $9,000 on it. So I'd recommend reducing it down to $25,000, which is a $10,000 savings. Let's see, page 35. There's just 2 left. Under Recreation Center Maintenance. So this is one of those that I think we are routinely underfunding. And if you look at the actual expenditure for 2021, which was $70,000, I have a sneaking suspicion that even the increase from $15,000 up to $25,000 is not enough. So I'm going to recommend $40,000 for this particular line item, meaning Recreation Center Maintenance. And so that is a $15,000 increase. And the very last one is on page 36. And this is the OPEB, which stands for Other Post-Employment Benefits. It seems like it's gone incrementally up in large leaps, where we spent only $100,000 last year. The budget for the current year is $200,000, and the proposal is to increase it to $300,000. I'm just making a modest reduction of $30,000, so bringing it down to $270,000. And so that's it for the town. I believe the total for all of those things is $607,500 decrease and $40,000 increase for a net reduction of $567,500. On the Board of Ed side, they are requesting an increase of $1,695,600, and I am recommending a reduction to a $1.5 million increase, which is not an enormous reduction. It's only $195,000. So that's it. Those are my recommendations.
So what is your change in Board of Ed?
Board of Ed reduced by 195, which brings it down to just a hair under 60. So 59,970, 730, I think it is.
That's a $60,000 reduction? Is that what you're saying, Nancy?
So 195.
One night?
$195,000.
$195,000 reduction. They had asked for 1.7, and I'm recommending 1.5, roughly.
Where would that come from? Did you apply that anywhere? Or no?
So, again, my impression, not only in reading the reports from Howard, but also in just reading through their other materials, it just seems like when they discover, oh, well, we're short on such and such, we'll just use ARPA money to pay for it. And so I wish we could just do that on a monthly basis here on the town side. We can't. We have to wait until the end of the year in terms of all kinds of reconciliations. So, my feeling is that the teachers in our town are working very, very hard. And I think that the administrators are certainly working hard, but not twice as hard as our teachers. So certainly the administrator salaries that are increasing by substantial amounts both mid-year last year and then again at the end of the year and now again this year, that might be one place that we could find some money.
That's it?
And that's it.
Michael, did you have any changes?
Generally, at this time, I don't, although I do think that it's possible that Board of Ed can find some savings. We right now are granting 100% of their request, and although the Superintendent Stirk made an incredibly concise and efficient presentation of the relevant information, it doesn't mean that we have a total concurrence or approval on all of his numbers. Right now, I see the 2.9% increase as not excessive, but if there was a way to include that in the formula, that might reduce our dependence on the unappropriated fund balance, then I think it should be considered.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that exactly supports Mr. Frieda's point, which is to not only support our AAA bond rating, but to reduce our reliance on the general fund transfers, establishing a lower baseline for the next fiscal year when we will not have some of these one-time sources of revenue, and also, as I mentioned before, allowing us some breathing room for the building fees and fire fees that are both, fairly low right now, as well as lagging tax collection. So I think that we have to make some cuts to expenditures in order to just make sure that we have that wiggle room.
Now, most of the line items you suggested are in the $5,000 to $10,000 range.
I had a few 50s, yeah.
Well, the 50 ones you had was part-timers in finance, which I don't agree with. The 50 contract obligation, Mr. Frieder's already reduced the number once. We find it in a comfortable area. I wouldn't expect board members would want to reduce it even more. Not bringing the 2 firemen in, I don't think is advantageous for the town.
Please explain why.
If he can reduce, first of all, in his proposal, he made it very clear that if you did reduce those two people, then you need to increase his overtime line, because he would not have sufficient dollars to cover that. And he said that in his presentation. But let me finish what I was
Please.
getting at.
Yep.
Your OPEB, you wanna reduce it 30,000.
Uh-huh.
The problem is, there's no context behind what you're saying. Do you realize our liability is 96 million, and we only just recently started putting money in there the last several years? Why would you reduce it?
My context is historically that.
But you don't understand the entire line item. The line item is a $96 million deficit, obligation that the town has.
Right.
That the town is in the process of starting to yearly fund and show the trend to all the agencies that we are increasing our contributions. The town's intention is, and if you notice their pensions, which I think when Michael came in, we're in the 40s, now they're in the 97% range. The intention of the town is to fund those pension liabilities 100%, and then divert our effort to take care of the other liability the town has in OPEB. So
we've already
reducing something,
we've already made this expenditure this year, correct? It's a
Okay,
one-time
It's actually
payment?
not an expense.
it's not an expense.
It's not an expense.
Money's not leaving, we're setting aside funds.
It's
for
in our
town liability.
expenditure report, right?
It's an expenditure.
Okay, then it is an expenditure. Okay,
And the same thing.
The expenditure was on page 80 of the capper for last year anyways, right?
Yeah,
And the,
it's not money that leaves the town, the money just goes into an account for a liability the town has. That's what I'm saying.
in the same way that we set aside money for contractual obligations, correct?
No, it's a little
Rick,
bit
can you give me a
different.
second, please?
Sure.
Sure.
We're actually not even paying for the annual cost of that, Nancy. If you go to page 80, the capper, it gives benefit payments, including refunds and member contributions. So if you look at last year,
3 million?
I think the right number to look at, Rich, I think is the 2.8. That's the direct payments to
Yeah,
the members. There's some other costs here, right?
Basically, a $3 million increase in our liability in 1 year,
Right.
and we only put 200,000 in for it.
Right.
That's what I was getting at. I'm sorry, Tim,
No, that's all right.
if I misread what you were saying, or you misread what I was saying. Our liability just increased $3 million. We only put 200,000 to it. This year, we're only putting 300,000. We need to grow that number. You arbitrarily cut it, not understanding what's behind the number. And a lot of these little 10,000, 5,000,
If the grand scheme is, millions of dollars, $30,000 is not gonna make a big difference, right? It will make a big difference in terms of our annual budget, but it
No, it
won't make a
wouldn't.
big difference in
it would
terms
make, a $30,000 change in a $100 million budget is gonna do nothing. It's not gonna move it, it wouldn't even move it 0.00001 of a mil, probably. But, again, I wanted to get past the expenditures so we can get to revenue. Did anyone else have any other expenditures they wanted to propose? Would you like to put your suggestion into the form of a motion, Nancy?
I would like to recommend reducing the expenditures by $567,500 on the town side, and I would like to reduce the Board of Ed budget by $195,000.
Is there any other, is there a second?
I'll second it for discussion.
Is there any other discussion?
For the discussion, if I might.
Sure.
Look, I wanted to tell you that I was listening very carefully
I'm
tonight.
certain you were.
And I'll give you credit for going through all the line items and trying to come up with some suggestions.
Thank you.
I'd be on board with you summarizing to us these in writing. Some of these I think we can work with, but I'm not for cutting back the fire department and cutting back public safety. I'm really reticent on cutting back education, but I'll take a look at a lot of your suggestions though on some of these line by lines.
So we're not trying to reduce the size of the fire department. I'm just recommending that we don't grow it further. There's a difference.
But you're suggesting take the two out though, right?
Take the two out, exactly.
See, I'm not on board with that though, that's the thing, so.
So why do you think, Mr. Frieda, that having an 11-man shift that does not provide any additional service to our town could actually be a benefit.
But that's your opinion, it doesn't serve a service.
It
provide
doesn't
service.
activate another vehicle. They would simply have a fourth person on, say, the engine, as an example. And again, I don't know exactly how
Technically, there
many.
could be no extra people on the engine.
Well-
The person's filling for someone that's not there.
We have one of our fire commissioners here. I'd like to hear her point of view.
Well, I'm for adding the firefighters. I mean, I think that the chief did a really good job of explaining. I know Nancy had her model that every firefighter had earn $1, and then if they came in on overtime, it was $1.50, but that's not reality because the range of salaries is so great. And on a regular basis, the contractual replacement line item has been a problem. And that is a way to fix that problem. And I've said before, I came to you guys before because I work in healthcare. This is a model that is often used in group homes, in hospitals, because it is a good way to control staffing. Because there's multiple problems with running low on staff on a regular basis. You are creating a greater chance of having injuries, you're having burnout, and all of those things. And so that's one side of it. The other piece is, how the chief uses the staff that's there. If there's 11 men, is going to depend on what's going on at the time. What are the calls that come in? When you have a fire, you need a certain base of men. And having 11, even if you have 11 all at the fire at the same time, you're still going to need to call in volunteers. And the volunteer rates, we got them last month, where he talked about the number of calls that have come into the volunteer firehouses where there is absolutely no response because they're not able to get enough volunteers in to run the apparatus. So to me, I would like to see us make sure that our fire department is fully funded in the way that the chief tells us brings in public safety. There is nothing worse than having an emergency call go in, having your house on fire, or having a medical emergency and not having someone respond on time. And I think he's done a very good job of explaining what those firefighters are going to do. So I actually would have a very hard time supporting a budget that gives the Board of Ed the kind of additions that they're getting when we're not funding the fire department. fully.
No, I made a recommendation to cut the Board of Ed as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm not going to get into it.
No question.
But again, I'm not trying to, back and forth, but again, by the fire chief's own admission, when I asked him, what would you do if 11 people showed up? He said, well, we'd find something for that 11th person to do. That's not better service.
I don't think that's an accurate
Yeah.
way to
That's exactly what he said.
But I understand that, but I just think it's not an accurate assumption about how the fire department works. It's a
Exactly.
very complex thing that I don't think anyone, even as a fire commissioner, I don't think I can tell the chief, this is how you should run your department at the time, because there are too many factors that come in. It's not as simple as you have 11 men, you do this with them.
I understand. Let's
All right, so
let's stop crossing. Let's just, is there any other discussion? All those in favor?
I have a point of order, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
You allowed a member of the public to speak before.
I didn't allow the person to speak,
No, I
actually.
did that, yeah.
A member of your board mentioned that there's a member of the fire commission here, and I think it's great that she spoke, but if one member of the public is allowed to speak before you vote, I think all members of the public should be allowed to speak before the vote. Because even though she is a fire commissioner, at this meeting, she's a member of the public. And I think that it was very important for this board to hear from her. But I think you should hear from all members of the public prior to voting. Thank you for the point of order.
Mr. Chairman, well, I'd like to let you.
No, I mean, my position has always been not to be influenced until we know everything. And we are at a point that pretty much every department has presented their facts to us.
Well, we have a town meeting in April, and then we reconvene in April here.
Yeah. But if our third selectman I don't think you're going to speak against what she said, so if you're going to just repeat what she said, I'd like you to wait till the town meeting. But if there's information you're gonna add to what's been presented to us, I'll give you a few minutes to speak.
I'll take the 2 minutes.
I said a few, but go ahead.
Okay. I think we need to put the microphone.
Oh, there is one over there.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Have a seat.
And again, this is, I am not setting a precedent, because this cannot happen.
No, quite honestly, I think this
Well, I'll give you a
should have
couple
been called out. But
Again,
I'm happy to hear
as
anyway.
a member of a board that's relevantly connected to the budget,
I will limit my comments to just the fire
Please.
department, since that's what
please.
Commissioner Caldwell's comments were. And then at the end, for the regular public comment, I may have more comments.
That's fine.
First of all, Mr. Chairman, good evening. Sally Buemi, 5 Blossom Drive. I want to thank you for honoring my request to revise
oversight.
the agenda. Yes, sir. But I want to commend you for working quickly to accommodate my request to revise the agenda in a timely fashion.
Time was tight.
Well, I sent you the notice at 10 a.m. and you had till 5
Yeah.
because you have a 24-hour, you have to post 24 hours before.
Yes.
So I appreciate that, and I wanted to publicly commend you for accommodating my request to include public comment tonight. I have a slightly different approach to the 2 new firefighters, and I alluded to this a while ago. We haven't even seen the financial and operational ramifications of the initial 8 firefighters that were phased in over several years, the past several years. The last 2, which I call firefighters 7 and 8, haven't even gone on shift yet. And 6 and 7, the 3rd batch of 2, just went on full-time in January. So we have not even seen the full financial and operational consequences of the 8 that were phased in, with the last 2 being phased in this current 21-22 fiscal year. So it's very difficult, I think. We have no base to measure the all-important contractual replacement line, which is what the chief is arguing, the benefit of having 11, where if one guy's out, he'll still operate at 10. The problem is, if you operate at 11, then you're paying 11 salaries. You're always paying 11 salaries. If one guy's out, well, he might not be replaced, but the guy out is still being paid because he's out on sick time or vacation time. We have no baseline to measure it against. And look at the current contractual obligation line. If you look at page 10, the contractual line is currently at 82.7%, only 67% through the fiscal year. So there's no question in my mind that the current contractual line is just going to spiral out of control. So if there is 11 men working on a shift, it will take 2 times when no one's being replaced to make up for that cost. We haven't been given any indication where the break-even point is. We're just told we'll save on when going from 10 to 11, but when we're at 11, we have to have 2 out, saving the half to make up for that. And I also strongly agree with Mrs. Barrett, who says that this will have no operational impact. Every apparatus in the fire department, be it a ladder truck, which needs 2, a rescue unit also needs 2, the ladder needs 2, the rescue needs 2, and an engine 3. Having one more man on shift does not offer the operation of another apparatus. There's no apparatus that can be operated with just one guy. So when all 11 show up, and she's absolutely true, I listened to his workshop, and when she asked what happens with the 11th guy if they all show up, he said, we'll find a place for him somewhere. Well, that doesn't satisfy me that the $250,000 that it's going to cost the taxpayers to have 2 more with salaries and benefits is going to be recouped. And I want to remind Mr. Frieda and Mr. Doheny of the Board of Selectmen workshop in 2016, when the chief came to us arguing for a second assistant chief who would do paramedic billing, and he said at an initial cost of $89,000, and he showed us a chart and told us that it would bring in $350,000. And we took it hook, line, and sinker. Okay, great, we're gonna spend $89,000, we're gonna bring in $350,000. Well, look at your last 4 year-end special funds, Mr. Chairman, and you will see that the paramedic billing line lost over $105,000 each of those 4 years. So be careful about what we're promised, especially when we have no baseline from which to measure. I may think differently about adding firefighters in the future when I have more information about the financial impact of the first 8. So I would be against hiring any more firefighters at this time until we fully evaluate the impact of the 8. Thank you.
Thank you, Sally. Again, to remind everyone, this is the first meeting, not the final meeting of the budget. After the town meeting, we reconvene after the entire public has a chance to vet their opinions. Again, if there's not any other discussion, as I said, and I'll make my position clear again, the items, the significant items that are in here relate to part-timers in finance, the fire department, and OPEB, and Board of Ed, and I'm comfortable where they are personally. So if there's no other discussion, all those in favor of making the changes, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, say nay. Nay.
Nay.
Abstain?
I'm abstaining only because I think that this needs more work, and
And again, we do have another meeting to
there were
go
some very
through.
good points made by Ms.
And
Parrott.
Mr. Frieda noted that, but as it stands right now, it's not a modification I'm looking to send to the town.
And just to be clear, I made changes to 15 departments, so not 3 or 4.
No, I said there's only 3 or 4 that I thought were significant enough to warrant looking at. A $3,000 change or a $5,000 change
As I
doesn't
said, keep
really.
track of the pennies and the dollars will take care of themselves, because they added up to over $600,000.
I'd rather not debate it because you're changing numbers based on this is what I think it should be without knowing the substance behind it, like the OPEB.
I was looking at the historical numbers.
Yeah, and that's not what we do. That's what you, that's not what you make, that's not what you make decisions based on. You don't make changes based on strictly that. There's a lot of information that goes into
Absolutely, but
where
it
these
is
numbers
what
come.
the information that we have available to us as board members to make those decisions.
So we actually, we can do our, well, you know what, let's talk about revenue first before we make the resolutions. The other thing Mr. Frieda had mentioned earlier on is there was some verbiage change and dollar amount changes on page 7. You don't have it on a sheet, I'll give it to you verbally, and then I want to discuss these items as it stands. The revenue fund balance appropriated should not be 725, it should be 290.
Right.
Right.
And the unappropriated should be 1,135,000.
The same subtotal. in the
Same,
category.
yeah, the totals are same, just the listing of what the amounts are for those 2 items changed.
Could you repeat that, please?
The first item appropriated is 290,000.
Uh-huh.
Unappropriated, 1,135,000.
And what's the reason for this?
Just the way they're classified, with one's appropriated, one's unappropriated. The dollars in the appropriated line is only 290. That's all that's available.
Yeah, I'm just asking, why are we shifting the money from one to the other category?
Because the original number in the original number that I had to work with before Ed passed away was, that would have supported the 700,000+. When I double-checked it after the Board of Selectmen workshop and after the first Board of Finance meeting, I realized that that wasn't the money that was in there, so that's why we're changing it.
Okay.
Going through the revenue, once you pass those items, we do have project fund transfers, which are a little less than they've been historically. Current taxes is based on this revenue schedule. Everything else is kind of tracking with Mr. Frieda feels and what he's gotten from the state. What he had started this conversation off earlier was the fact that unappropriated fund balance in increasing taxes does affect the town's AAA rating. The town is going out for bonding in about 7 months. I like to discuss not using fund balance money and bringing the tax back to where it was 3 years ago, which was about a 0.47 increase. That will more than cover this. And actually that delta, which is probably a couple $100,000, based on conversations, you know, especially with Diane and some of the things she said here tonight, I like to increase the contingency fund another $200,000, not knowing where fuel and product costs are going to be in the next fiscal year. I know it personally. I got to be a 45% increase in fuel cost. And I have a lot of vehicles, and they're big numbers.
So if we reduce the revenue from the fund balance, then we basically also have to reduce our expenditures by $1.4 million.
No, I would take it as a tax increase. 0.47 would generate us
About $1.6 million.
$1.6 million.
Oh, so this is the setup for the mill rate increase.
So $1.6 million. We like your comments, Nancy.
Okay.
$1.6 million. No, you know what? You just can vote against it and use fund balance, and then pay more in bonding.
So just to your, I
It would be
have
$1.6
a
million,
question.
which means I would take almost $200,000, $175,000, whatever the math works out, and increase the contingency fund. That's what I'm proposing.
I
Any
have a
discussion?
quick question. At the end of every fiscal year, Ed Swinkowski used to give us what I would refer to as the August memorandum, in which he summarizes all the highlights of the fiscal year. And at the end of that, he would always list the surplus when we had it, and he would deduct this fund balance amount. So isn't that effectively just paying ourselves back,
It would be, yeah.
right?
Yeah.
We're already doing it.
Not sure I follow you.
Yeah,
I'm not following where it is.
Mr. Centofonte was basically reflecting that as well in his presentation, that basically you can't be using that money as a true source of revenue. And really, we're not, if at the end of the year, we pay it back into the
GAAP and
general.
budget, that's what he was doing. His comment there was to distinguish between GAAP accounting and budgetary basic accounting.
That's what he's doing, right? There's a difference.
So we should be increasing our unappropriated fund balance, not decreasing it. That's my point.
Maybe I could be heard, Mr. Chairman?
Sure.
I guess, Nancy, you went through this in detail. I guess I'm a little bigger picture. I think we all know, besides the usual contractual increases that we've seen in all the departments and the Board of Ed, the numbers, I mean, every year when Mike does his presentation, which I'm sure he'll do again, he usually starts off with what are the big numbers that are driving the budget. It tends to be capital insurance. Those are sort of the two things in the past years that drive the budget, right? This year, it's probably the adds to staff. No, actually, you said 10 or 13.
13.
I got
Want me to list
7,
them for
honestly,
you?
on the town side and 3
I'll
on
show
the.
you.
on-
2
well, it's okay.
firefighters,
That's
3
okay.
patrolmen.
No, that's okay.
Okay.
I
You
got,
want me to,
so, but they're add to staff, right? There was a couple on the Board of Ed too, right?
2, 3.
3 is what I got, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So in any event, I mean, I think those are probably the big numbers that are driving this. I guess we could argue over whether or not the additional firemen are gonna reduce the overtime number or not. But what I've heard, not only from the department heads, just like everyone on this board, but also from Mike, is that the various departments need these extra personnel. Fire, we talked about, police, we talked to extra burglaries in town. They want to move the supernumerary over, they want to add a supernumerary at the high school and get the patrolman back to the, I think, investigative division. I think there was the, field in Public Works.
Oh, you have a collector and you have a laborer.
No,
The engineer?
the
The
field.
Oh, the engineer?
Oh, the
Yeah,
engineer.
which was a position we had years ago and got eliminated in one of the budgets some years back. So, without going on, I guess my view is, look, I think truthfully, in my position is I'm willing to let the townspeople decide if they want these ads to staff. If they don't, or they think the budget's too high for some reason, well, they can turn the budget down. You know, and we've got some decrements already in here. I know you've got some, I guess moving on to the revenue side here, we haven't had a tax increase for a couple of years. Richie just talked about a slightly less than a $500,000 increase. You know, my math tells me that's probably somewhere between $10 and $15 a month, depending upon the size of your house, you know, here in town, right? If you think about it, to have that small an increase over really 3 years, right? It's nothing. I'm not saying there aren't some residents in town that's a meaningful number, but it's relatively small. And I guess I fall into the camp where, yes, we've used fund balance in the past. We used $1.7 million last year. This budget's got $1.4 million, but we're also using the ARPA money on the capital side, which we haven't done in the past. And I think, like some of the other board members, I'm worried about what happens next year when we're sitting in the same room on the same day. And so I would say I'm leaning towards a small tax increase. I think slightly less than $500,000, if that's what Rich is suggesting, is I think palatable. It's palatable to me, and I would think palatable to the residents of the town. Again, because when we really do the math, you're talking between $10 and $15 a month.
Anyone else?
Well, I have other points to make, but
Now's the time.
regarding, you know, regarding your discussion you're having now, it's 6 of one, half a dozen of the other, is depending on what unfortunate or what detrimental path we want to take. How was the language that the rating agencies used in describing the detrimental effects of continuous usage of the fund balance? Because in a way, you know, Nance had a point there, that we pay into it every year. We're taking something out of it. Now, we are taking an extra large amount out at the 1.135. But
But don't forget, historically, what we did was we took the surplus that had been generated the
Yes.
prior year and rolled it over, so.
yeah,
you know,
so we're going
we weren't-
beyond that this time.
Yeah, we weren't invading, if you will, the principle.
And we are getting below 8% with that kind of withdrawal. But was it a definite outcome, or because, you know, they have to look at our total risk profile, and we do fairly well with debt to equity, debt to asset ratios, and paying into our pensions and so forth, and taking care of OPEB. We you know, this town is very well managed. And I don't think we have to be so paranoid that that we're taking away the opportunity to have no tax increase. So, but I see both sides, and I do think that we can still fine-tune this over the next month to make to lessen the pain.
I mean, and you do realize over the last 2 or 3 years, we've actually dropped like 0.46, 0.47 mil.
Well, whatever happened in the past, I don't think that the public's going to have a memory on that.
No, but I'm just saying, we're not,
you know,
we're not putting the public in any worse place than they were, you know, 3 years ago.
Yeah.
And 100, as Tim said, $10 to $15 a month for added fire, added police.
Right.
Michael's economic development and the stuff that's going through land use, needing the engineer. I mean, I think those are positions that need to be filled.
I'm not arguing against that. I'm arguing against
How you fund it.
first of all, I'm arguing against 0.47. And then we have to also argue the point whether it should be at zero or anything, or at any increase.
Well, put the expense side, if we can agree on the expense side, put the expense side. I guess it'd be a question is, how do we want to fund those expenses? Do you want to use unappropriated fund balance? Do you want to, I mean, that's all we have left, unappropriated fund balance or a slight mill rate increase.
Right, and I think we could almost cut it in half and go with less of a draw on the unappropriated fund balance, and if necessary, have a very minimal tax increase, if necessary.
Like a third, like a 0.33?
That we can talk over in the next month. I know we have to come up with some figures today.
Well,
You propose whatever you
We're
want.
going to come up with numbers that will go to the town for the expense side.
Okay.
But Michael also will be presenting, usually does present an expected mill rate.
So I had planned in the April meeting to have the same discussion on TV with the public about the fact that I wanted to put together a no tax increase budget, but there could be unintended consequences. And I thought all along, let the public weigh in on it, see what they think.
Right, but I think you have to put all the cards on the table. So, for example, the other way to think about this is this list of changes that you have. The budget that we had back on January 19th represented an $8 million increase. Now, there was an enormous chunk of that was, I think, $3.5 million was capital. So you're taking out the capital piece by using the ARPA funds here, but you're only having 3 changes to the operating budget, right? For, what, $500,000, something like that? So that still means both in this year, the taxpayers, as well as other sources of revenue, are going to be funding most of the expenditure, or all of the expenditures, and then that will be the baseline for subsequent years when we don't have this rescue funds. So that's my concern. And yes, I want to be able to get these capital items, no question about it, but I also feel a little bit torn about increasing our expenditures side of the town budget and having just so few reductions. So that's my point.
So I have other related questions before we even get to the bottom line figures. ARPA money, 1.67 million. That's what's in there right now.
Yep.
How did you come up with that number? Where'd that number come from?
I came up with that number on what I needed to balance the budget to show no tax increase through the utilization of the federal funds. That's how I came up with that number.
Is that number flexible?
Yes, but I have to analyze what we already have encumbered, like these decrements that I positioned, to see how much money is left. If you're suggesting using more, then I have to take a look at that to see if we can use more, knowing that we've got money, we've got the expenses that we're going to apply to it, okay? And keep in mind, we have a grant out there, a $2.8 million grant that we've applied for center block improvements, and there's $1.4 million of ARPA that has to match that, so.
Okay.
But are you suggesting reducing the ARPA fund? Because we could certainly be flexible on that, but we have to pick up the revenue somewhere.
No, I just want to know how firm that figure is, because according to my unknowing math, we start off with the two-year total, of 7 million, right? We start off with that. We can see that there's 1.17 in this year's budget. We know that we have capital that will be paid for, that is intended to be paid for, that is what is that 3.7? What is the total of capital that you want to use ARPA money for in the upcoming budget?
We've got 5 million somewhere.
But I'd have to add up, to answer your question, I have to add up those items that I mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
So, in other words, I'm
Okay.
showing $3,763,000 in decrements, okay? But that includes the 3 public works items there, and also some of the top items. So, to answer your question, let's say all that capital adds up to be $1.4 million.
That's all?
Or whatever it is.
The ARPA money's $1,674,000, the eliminations are $2,089,000.
Okay, So, all right, so 1.6, 1.17, the 1.4 destined for central block.
You got $1 million
I mean, you
in
know,
this year's budget?
We can take a 10-minute recess and try to figure this out.
I'm not sure what you're suggesting still, truthfully, Mike. What are you actually suggesting?
I'm trying to determine what is available that other members of this board would be comfortable with on that ARPA line.
Well, but Mike can elaborate, because he's on the front line, and I'm not, but he's got other projects committed
Right.
to that work for some of this ARPA money.
So if we pulled the 1.6 out, that's a gap of revenue 1.6 that conceptually would require a tax increase.
Yeah,
That's why I put the money in to prevent a tax
Right.
increase.
What if it was more than 1.6?
So if we put more than 1.6 in?
Yeah.
So let's say we put 1.8 in. So that's basically $200,000 more than what the expenditures are. So if we did that, in theory, you'd have a $200,000 surplus.
Well, first of all, I thought we had the choice of either self-identifying the items, which we did here.
Right.
Or taking the 10 million. It was an either or, I thought, right?
Right.
So,
I don't know if it's an either or.
Well, so we create a hybrid approach here, okay,
Yeah.
which has been cleared through the federal government. Utilization of ARPA funds for revenue.
In the budget and utilization outside the budget.
Right.
Right.
Inside the budget under governmental services, okay, that's the federal rule, okay, and the new rule. So that's what we did here. So are you saying you want to add more to ARPA in the revenue?
If it has a less detrimental impact than the amount right now scheduled to be taken out of the unappropriated fund balance. I'm trying to offset.
Oh, I see, you want to offset it. You
I'm
want
trying to,
take-
right.
Okay.
I'm trying to,
Timmy wants to take the.
I'm trying to find ways to reduce the amount of the
Fund
unappropriated fund balance withdrawal. Okay? Or the tax increase.
Right.
Okay? One or the other. But I'm trying to find other alternative sources of funding here.
All right. So let's say we moved ARPA up to 300,000 more, and you're suggesting that we take the 300,000 out of the fund balance then and reduce that and show a decline to the rating agency.
Yes. And the proposal I'm gonna make is to reduce Board of Ed by 195. Because I think they can absorb it. I'm not telling them where to do it, I just think they can absorb it.
Mike, is the 300,000 for the fire engine lease, is that cut because we're not gonna get it? Or is this gonna be covered by ARPA?
That's ARPA, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so the total for all of those things that you listed was about, excuse me, 1.1 million.
Okay, so 1.1.
And we can probably get another 100,000 off of some of the other suggestions that we do agree with Nancy on. Okay, as that's another 100,000 down. I think that we can work on this just a little bit and find the right mix.
So you're suggesting no tax increase still? You're saying just reduce the fund balance, which will help us with the rating agencies, and keep the mill rate the same?
We, if you want to test a minor tax increase, a quarter mil or something, to the public at the next hearing, you could do that, and then you could switch it back again if depending on the public's response. I mean, you can trial balloon anything you want for the next 30 days.
Well, that's true. That could be done.
I'm just saying, you know, either way, there seems to be some pain here. Either we pay a little bit more now, or we pay a little bit more in bond funds, bond interest, when our rating changes.
And you have a large hole to fill next year, too, then.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, I understand the sensitivity to the bond ratings, Mike. My comments weren't directed at that so much as what Richie just said, which is that.
You have a hole to fill.
Right, we got a big hole to fill already next year, and well, actually, what you're doing is you're not changing the hole. You're
Yeah.
swapping dollars around.
Yeah,
Right.
that's not gonna help.
Right.
I mean, could I not add to it and go down to 0.33? No, I think 0.47 is kind of the right number.
How much money that we take out of the fund balance, how much money do we need to not affect the AAA rating?
They want to see it
They
grow.
want to see it, yeah.
We're reducing it.
But if there's some figure we can take out and still maintain the AAA rating, and then,
I don't think they're gonna go for that. They want the fund balance to increase and they want taxes
They
to
want to see
increase, so.
taxes.
is there
If
a
you-
time frame on that?
7 months, we're going to be going out again.
Yeah.
And that's when it'll hit us.
Yeah, probably October, so it's, 7 months or so.
You're going to pay now, you're going to pay later.
Yeah.
Now, there is a positive side here that I'm hoping that we might get about $600,000 more in FEMA revenue, which is
That
not,
can only help the fund balance.
not budgeted. I didn't put that in the budget this year. And I said to Ed, because Ed was with us then, I said, Ed, we don't want to budget that item. If it comes in, then we drop it right to the fund balance, so. that's
That
six-
might be a way to lessen the amount we need in contingency. Because of
I
the-
still would like, I think Diane was right, I'd still like to increase contingency. You don't want to take credit for it? I'll take credit for it. I think we should
I'm
increase
taking
contingency.
credit for, we're still, no matter what you do, it's either you're gonna have to have a tax increase at some point. Something has to be done, because what we're spending, what was being asked, and you look at the expenses, now I'm not saying we can't reduce and use some of Nancy's ideas, but we're gonna see line items go up. I just know it. And we're not planning for that, so either we're gonna have a problem now, or we're gonna have a problem next year. We're just shifting the problem, kinda like Tim said, it's either
Well, it's what
this
Hampton did
pocket
with
or
their
that
pensions.
pocket, yeah.
It's what the town of Hampton did with the pensions, just kicked them down the road till it
You don't
choked.
want to do that.
Yeah, but that's kind of what we're doing. We're not
I
planning.
don't want to do that.
I know, we're not
wanna-
planning. I mean, I'm a planner. I plan everything. I am a planner.
Right.
And I analyze things too. So I think some of Nancy's ideas, but I just concerned. That's all.
Right. And again, to Mr. Frieda's point, I think we have to be focused on needs, not wants. Because those towns who have focused on wants rather than needs, the state has taken over their financial reporting.
Well, that's true, but we're so
We're
far
neat.
away from that.
No, I'm not in any way implying that we're in that boat. I'm just saying that, again, just to reorient everyone, let's really just, I think we need to focus on what is really important for this.
The lion's share of our increases is basically all related to public safety.
Yeah.
Everything's related to public safety. Now, if we pass these numbers as we're talking, and the town comes out and they say, cut education, then we get a mandate.
That's only 5 of the 13 positions are in public safety.
There's not 13.
Can I just add a point here? I know it's a side point, but the health insurance line, I hope that in the next month we can meet and get that all squared away. Because just not having any feedback on that and just seeing a 3% number in there increase is not what we've been accustomed to.
Well, we haven't had an insurance meeting, but it's something that I'm dealing with the agents on, and our dental claims have gone down, our medical claims have gone slightly up. We're still showing a 3% increase, and it really is, every month that goes by, it's a 13-month look back on the claims history, so every month we'll have to see what March comes in at. So if March drops, then the 3% may drop to 2.8%. If March spikes, then we, somewhere along the line may have to readjust that, but we won't know until we get the claims at the end of the month. That's something that I'm actively involved with, so.
Yeah. And by the way, the contractual obligation line, I know you just reduced that. Usually when that gets reduced, you're supposed to increase one of the department full-time lines correspondingly to whatever contracts get settled.
I think you may have missed Mike's point in that. What he was saying was that we've got money budgeted in this year that originally, I think when the budget was together, we did not think we were gonna use that money now, and he believes he'll settle the contracts
So
before
it'll
year
be
end.
covered in this fiscal year,
And it'll
not
come
next
out of
fiscal
this
year.
year's budget. And by the way, we have up to 60 days after year end, really, to settle those, to even use up the money in there. So I think that's what you're saying, Mike.
Yeah.
Okay, but I think the contractual obligation line it's in the current year is supposed to take care of any current year.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
That's what I'm saying.
I'm looking to settle
You
contracts
sell
this
contract,
current
we don't
year.
have to put the money in for
But-
next year's increase.
So-
Oh, no, I see what he's saying too.
No, but at the same time, it also is supposed to cover next year's increase. That is next year's, I'm sorry, next year's allocation covers next year's increase.
Right.
So whether it's settled or not, the money still has to be paid out. But all right, we can clarify that again at a later time.
Yeah.
We can let it sit for now, but I think that's an oversight.
But I think for contractual obligations, we pay into it every year. So there's a pot of money that we pay into every year.
No, but it's directly computed based on some calculations and some estimates. So,
Meaning the annual amount that you have.
which can widely vary depending on
Sure.
what contracts
Which you
remain unsettled and open.
Right.
Just to recap, I mean, right now, the budget's standing at basically 55 for the town and 60 for the Board of Ed. That's what I would like to send to the town meeting, but I'd also like to add that 200,000. Or do we just
The 200 for contingency,
add 200 for contingency?
but keeping the mill rate the same?
I'm not even talking mill rate. Yeah, the mill rate, see how the town responds. I mean, I like to, I like your presentation to include, at least a third of a mill, if not the .47. So, I mean, but we really don't vote on that. That's where the town is making expenses. But your presentation has always included that, so I guess you can make the determination, or you could ask us to make the determination now, see where everyone feels.
Well,
Michael, I think we got him for a little bit, not a lot.
well, my sense is to go in with a no tax increase. I know we need it, we really, for the rating agencies, but I'm gonna be, again, when I present this, I'm gonna tell the public that we're not gonna be able to continue to have no tax increases here. Somewhere along the line, it's gonna have to hit. Every other municipality that I've spoken with, even with the utilization of ARPA, they're torn with this same subject about whether to raise it, whether not to raise it. If they don't raise it this year, it's gonna hit next year. We're all in the same boat on this.
By the way, why did our bond expenses go up in the upcoming budget? I mean, is there more debt that is hitting?
Yeah, we're paying on, between the police department and the middle school. I happened to catch that. We had a lower number in than what it really should have been, so I brought it up to over 9 million.
Okay,
So,
all right. I mean, there's a lot of fixed, there's a lot of,
we're almost there.
Almost, yeah.
there's a lot of fixed costs that, I don't call them fixed costs, but a lot of legacy, there's a lot of costs here that have to do with insurance and Social Security and so forth that are double-digit increases in here. And we have to assume all those are correct.
Yeah, we went through all of it, yep. I didn't want to undercut those line items.
I mean, that's a big part of how we ended up at this 5.1 or 7.9 increase here, depending on what you're looking at.
So, that's how I feel. Now, coming back to the other points of view here, what would the reaction be? We don't know if we just brought the mill rate back up to what it was a few years ago. That would almost wipe out the fund balance. So then, when I go out to bond, the rating agency is going to say, wow, he's got nothing in the fund balance. Because the .47, trying to see the other point of view here, the .47 would raise, what did you say, Tim? 1.6?
1.6.
1.6. That'd wipe out the reliance on the fund balance. Question is, what will the public say? This is my concern. This is why I was willing to utilize the fund balance, run the risk of the AAA potentially being removed because of gasoline, inflation, food, all the bad news. At the same time, not that it makes it right, other municipalities are dipping into the reserves, utilizing ARPA. Even the state of Connecticut's doing that, to not raise taxes. It's not technically the right way to do it financially, but we're in a different time with inflation right now. 7.4% the last time I looked. So, I mean, we could go that way. I can tell the public what I'm talking about here tonight. We can throw a trial balloon up to see if we can get the .47, see what the public reaction is.
I don't think we could do anything less than that.
Yeah, that's so close to $500,000, and I think $500,000 is gonna grab people's attention. I don't think it's what people are gonna wanna see right now.
Does $12 or $15 a month grab their attention? Then they don't enhance public, do they not want to enhance public safety? You know?
Can we use a little bit more, can we put
a
$300,000 in ARPA money?
You're kicking the can. Mr. Frieda's economic growth has basically covered the town for increases this year.
Well, last year was an off year, but...
But even that, we still, the grand list grew enough to cover our basic budget. The difference is we're adding personnel, we're adding a lot in public safety. We're adding an engineer, which is needed because of all this economic development. Now, if you don't fund it correctly this year, you're kicking the can next year, and how are you gonna make up that difference next year?
All right.
I mean, I don't have a problem using the ARPA money, and Sally knows me well. I have no problem using the ARPA money for capital at all. I temper what I use on the operational side. I know we have to use it. I think it's important to use part of it, but I'm not gonna, I don't wanna be overwhelmed by it.
Yeah, so what if we get that through some discussion, some negotiation here, what if we get it down to a $250,000 increase, just for the first step?
I think like a .33 would probably get us close, we'll maybe be short $100,000.
There's other minor changes we can make here.
So maybe we do $1/3.
Well,
I don't like it.
let's come back to Jim Leonis's question earlier. Well, what Jim was trying to ask was how much reduction in the fund balance allocation would satisfy the rating agencies. I think your question got misinterpreted.
Right. So then would you want to do a calculation as to what has to be in there for it to be 8%? Or is that a magic number we can't meet because
They want
prior
10,
usage?
12, 14?
No, I mean just temporarily, for now.
I see.
Well, I can tell you what, 8% of this budget's $9,281,000.
So that's 400,000 more that we would need in the fund balance then.
So we need to grow the fund balance by 400, but yet we're taking $1.1 million off of it.
Right. So let me try to summarize it this way. Now, this is kind of a guess based on my sense dealing with the rating agencies. To answer Jim Leonis's question, we probably have to reduce that fund balance allocation that I presented here tonight by $600,000 to $700,000 to show that we're weaning off the reliance, okay, of fund balance. I think that even though they're looking for 10, 12, 14%, if I got between 9.5 and 10 in the first year from 8.23, and still, like I always do on the rating calls, is talk extensively about all these economic development projects I'm involved with, maybe we could squeak by and maintain a AAA rated. But by reducing the fund balance by that amount, then we have to go back to.
You're gonna be at 7, even if you're splitting it now,
Right.
you're going to, unappropriated will drop to probably 7.7, 7.7.
6.4.
6 point, if half of it?
If you take out the 1.4 million that's here.
No, but he wanted to split it, only take out half of it.
Oh, okay, so then, we're at what, 8 point something right now? 8 point,
We're at 8.23. Let's,
so it's gonna be like 7.4.
7.4, I was off a few
so
tenths.
Tim mentioned, what, 9.2 million, Tim, with this upcoming
Yeah.
budget?
Yeah.
So we're at 8.8. So if we get the 600,000 from FEMA, now we're at 9.4 million in fund balance.
Will get you where you wanna be there.
Right.
But then you're taking $500,000 out of fund
Out of fund
balance, so it
balance.
just wiped it out.
It's gotta be made up through something.
You're not gonna even hit the 8%.
That goes back to Michael's,
Even with, and that's even with a third of a mil?
right.
It's even with a third of a mil, we'll still end up below the 8%.
At the Board of Finance workshop, at the Board of Selectmen workshop session in January, I think I posed, that my intention was a no tax increase, but what would it look like if we had to go up 0.2 mils? So we're talking here 0.47, 0.25, 0.33. So,
I have a quick question for you, Mike. On, what is it, page 7, where it shows the income budget for the proposed 22-23 budget. Actual 2021, if you compare it to the current fiscal year, there's an increase of about $1 million for current taxes. But if you scan over to the right and you go from estimated for the current fiscal year to the proposed budget, it's an increase of just about $3 million. So are we able to achieve that with
Yeah.
the mill rate you're proposing?
well, the reason that number is that, because 2,905,000 is grant list growth that gets calculated in those categories.
As I was saying, Nancy, what Michael generated in grand list growth would have covered a normal budget with no tax increase easy. The fact that we're adding so much for public safety has pushed us outside of that, what Michael was able to
I just
generate.
got that today, so look at it.
So it's a 3% grant list growth. That's a combination of new residential homes being built, motor vehicle assessments going
On the
up.
bottom right, Nancy.
Yeah.
Yep.
So you see the 2,904,907, Nancy, you see that in the bottom? That's in
Include a
that,
possible cap, by the way, of, in the car tax rate?
yeah, well, the way that'll work is they're looking at, the state's looking at 29 mil cap, so.
Okay.
But, yeah, that helps Hartford, that's at a 77 mil.
Right.
But we're 30 point plus, it's not a big thing for us.
No.
Well,
Okay.
if we move forward and say we don't, we go with the two numbers you have, and then, I think if you look at it, so I think most of us are looking for a tax
Right.
increase.
I could present it both ways in April.
That's what I'm saying.
And say, look, here's where we're at, but we really need to reduce the fund balance reliance. And the alternative to help satisfy the rating agencies is we take that number down, and then I can say the other option is to raise the mill rate 0.25, 0.33, or 0.47. See what the public says.
And as far as the car tax cap, if it's 29 mils and we're at 30.71, that's not negligible.
That's what
Yeah.
well,
1.71 is,
Help me, Tim.
Yeah.
yeah, I was looking at, okay, that's a fair point.
Yeah.
I was looking at it that Hartford, Haven, Hamden, West Haven.
absolutely.
It's
No,
a
no,
big
no, no.
impact for
We're
them,
at
right?
5-6 mils, yeah,
Right.
absolutely.
All right, well, we do have to make a primary proposal that gets pushed ahead here.
Well, that's the expense sign we give them. And then we can debate what we wanna do next month as far as mill rate increase there. I can't see how there cannot be a mill rate increase.
So as to any changes in ARPA income or Board of Ed reduction, do you want to wait on that until April?
Well, yeah, let them make their, will known at the meeting. See who says they want to cut education, see who says they don't want to cut education, see who says they want to cut fire.
So no one here
police.
is willing to make any changes to the Board of Ed budget, other than me.
All right,
No, I said I would.
you like
I'm
Okay,
to-
supportive of
that's
that.
two.
Would you like to, well, your first motion was everything.
Yes.
If you want to make
So
another motion,
let me
Alright.
make it separately.
make a
Alright,
motion separately.
I'd like to make a motion to reduce the Board of Ed proposed budget for 2022-23 by $195,000.
I will second that.
Any discussion?
Their budget's $60 million.
All those in favor?
I guess on the discussion, Rich, I'll just say what I
Alright.
said before, you know, I don't know what the sum of those three new positions are, but I think I'm willing to go to the public hearing and see what the residents say before we make any cuts there.
That's what that's the same sentiment I had, and I said that earlier. Any other discussion? All those in favor?
I'm in favor.
I'm in favor.
All opposed? Opposed?
Opposed.
Abstain?
Public decide.
I'm going to abstain. I think on that.
Same thing, that's what the public hearing's for. We've always asked the Board of Ed to present us their budget with the understanding if it's reasonable. And, Mr. Hallahan's one that's always spoken at 2.5%
Yes.
increase.
I said it was not
It's a little
excessive
bit-
at all.
It's a little bit higher, but not, so.
Although if you take the average of this
Yeah.
year and last year, it's still a little steep for me.
But,
Because something happened last year.
I say, as I said, we have our 3 resolutions. We won't increase contingency, I'm assuming right now.
No.
Probably not.
So we'll make this resolution, and I would request that we make it in your presentation, you obviously speak of a mill increase, because I really don't see how we can not have one. I think it'd just end up costing the town more in the next year and a half than what that increase would be. That $10 or $15 people are gonna be paying a month, they're gonna pay a lot more than that in a year and a half's time if they, doesn't work out.
I don't think it's a good idea to give the general population do you want a tax increase or not? I know for a fact, I could ascertain that they're gonna say they do not want a tax increase. So we're gonna be back here fishing all over again. So, I wouldn't give them that option.
But if you explain to them, they'll have greater tax increases in the future due to our paying more interest for bonds.
But,
They have to look at the long-term implications too.
Mike, they're not gonna do that.
I mean,
They're gonna look at today's pocketbook. They're all up their wall and say, I can't afford it.
Thank you, Jim.
Yeah.
I mean,
We are
I'm
gonna
all
look
for
at
presenting a
today, I agree.
.47 mil increase.
And we're talking in generalities when we're saying $10 to $15, because there's some houses that are gonna pay that.
Oh, yeah, if you're higher,
Others are gonna pay a lot
that's
more.
kind of where the average is in town.
But again, if we look at the last 2 years, we had a great deal of difficulty collecting the taxes that were due and not judging anyone. People were going through really tough times. So that's continuing for some people.
We've collected taxes always in excess of 100% of what we allow, if I'm not
That is
mistaken.
absolutely not true. If you look at the numbers, it's not true, which is why our tax collector is working so hard at working at arrears and collecting unpaid taxes. So I just think that there are still people going through very difficult times and people trying to live on fixed incomes, and the prospect of a tax increase is not going to be well received. And more to the point, what is the point of this meeting? If the end result is just to be able to pass through what was handed to us, a week ago, why did we meet? If we're in agreement that we think that some changes should be made and some meritorious comments were made, I think we should.
I think the budget should stand as it was presented. I think we're fortunate to have the ARPA being able to carry our capital request. I am not one for funding operations with one-time revenue.
Excuse me,
I've never
Mr.
been
Chairman,
comfortable.
don't misunderstand me.
Oh, no, I don't.
I think our tax increase or a mill rate increase should be made in this room, not in the general population. That's what I meant to say when Mike said he was going to give them an option. I think we should make that decision.
All right.
Yeah, but sometimes it's based on public sentiment to a certain extent, but not entirely. Because you're right, they'll always say no, even when the answer has to be yes. So you're right, the decisions are made here, but it's based on, that's why we have
So, then Mike,
Public
do we
comment.
ask Mr. Frieda to include in his presentation?
Yeah, and alternatives. Sure.
Alternatives, and then just gauge the public's opinions from that? Is that what you want to do, or do you want him to present a rate increase? I'd rather you just present the rate increase,
I agree.
because I don't see
Because it came
how
from this room.
we, in good conscience, could not have a rate increase.
I think that he can make the statement that the majority of his board is willing to support a small tax increase, but there may be other options available.
Do that, and then Mr. Frieda said he was gonna look at some of Nancy's options.
Yeah, we
I'm happy
don't
to type
finalize
up
this,
Yeah, that's what,
we don't
yeah.
finalize this till next
More
month.
than happy to do
right?
that.
Yeah,
But
I mean, I think you do
But
both.
I think the
Yeah.
third option is actually decreasing the mill rate. That is another option. That again, if we have $3 million in our grand list and we have access to ARPA and our actual performance, operational performance was looking very good, I think that's not the time to say, oh, you know what, I need to hike up the mill rate. Those things don't go together.
I was trying to prompt Mike earlier, he didn't say it. Mike, didn't you say to me that you've got some projects in town, water-related, and others that, and
Yep.
you've got earmarked, so to speak, for the ARPA money?
Yes. But that is so fluid and changing, some of those projects I can handle through Public Works. Others, I
Through
have to
grants?
outsource. There are grants that we can apply for, so there could be a way to reduce the dependence on ARPA through the federal government's infrastructure grant program.
Get that Yacarino guy out there working, work the streets.
It's not even Dave, it's just, once the federal government gets the money, we all have the ability to apply for the grants.
Yeah.
So,
By the way, we've been budgeting 98.5% in taxes, we've collected more than that every year since 2014. You know, Ed used to give us that side by side,
Right.
Nancy, and I don't have it. We've collected, I think, 97.2 right now. We might be a little behind, I'm not entirely sure.
we're a little behind.
Yeah.
We still have a few months to go.
We'll be there.
So as I said, we've always collected more than what we've budgeted. Having said that, I'm going to read 3 resolutions. If everyone's in agreement that, well, I'll make the motion and then we'll vote on it if there's no other discussion. First, resolve that the Board of Finance recommends to the public hearing a fiscal year 2022-2023 town government budget of $55,857,267. Can I have a second to that resolution?
I second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Opposed?
I once again, I will abstain until we get the
Okay.
figure from the health
Gotcha.
insurance agents.
Resolved, the Board of Finance recommends to the public hearing fiscal year 2022-2023 Board of Education budget of $60,166,330. Can I have a second to that resolution?
I'll second.
Any discussion? All in favor? Aye.
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 Opposed?
Opposed?
Resolved that a fiscal year 2022-2023 budget recommendation of $116,023,597 be presented to the public hearing to be held on Tuesday, April 5th, 2022, with the town government to present first beginning at 7 p.m., followed by the Board of Education budget to begin no later than 8 p.m., with general discussion that follows as may be warranted. Can I have a second to that resolution?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
Opposed?
Those abstain?
I still abstain. But I do want to explain, I supported the Board of Ed because it's worthy of presenting that budget to the public as is, uncut.
I agree.
Okay.
Having said that,
I'm glad we worked
finishes-
through this, sir. You did a good job, Mr. Chairman. You're going to be on for another year, I can tell.
We move to public comment. Sherman, you go first.
Sherman made it to,
I made it.
what time? How many hours is this?
made it. Hello, Sherman.
It's all right.
Sherman Katz, 40 Sherwood Drive, North Haven, 54 years. You're going to present this to the public. Normally, Mike supports the budget and the public votes in favor of the budget, the majority of the people. What are you going to do to this town? Well, this is one of those years where I think it's time that you took that budget and went back to every department head and asked them to do a little trimming. Find a way to save a little bit of money. You're not willing to do it, ask them to do it. Secondly, you have, I think, 30% of the population in this town are seniors, thereabouts. Seniors that are living on anywhere from $1,000 to $2,000, $2,500 a month. I'm not pointing at anyone, but you guys are making that a week. It's very easy for you to say $10, $15 more a month for taxes. Very difficult to tell that to some nice little resident who can't pay for their medication, who can't go out of their house, certainly can't drive their car. Another $5 a week is going to hurt them. The other thing I wanted to say is that, and I hate to put it this way, but sometimes the tail wags the dog. There are certain departments in this town where the department heads have a free hand to do anything they want. And they're very convincing in the reason as to why they should do it. We have some citizens that see through it, some citizens that don't concern themselves with it. I think that's a shame, and I think you all know who those people are. So please consider sending this back to the department heads, and it doesn't take much for them to trim a little bit. And as you said at the one meeting, Mike, if we get Amazon, I promise I will never raise taxes in this town again. Well,
I haven't so far.
so far you haven't. We're going to see what happens.
And in theory, you still wouldn't be, by the way.
Well,
Because even at .47, you'd be at the same number you were 2 years ago.
that's not the same, though. I mean, if you get an increase in your pay and they take back 5% next year, and then give it to you again, where'd you go? Right. You know, you didn't make it.
Exactly, you're right where you started.
Please take this in the right way. It's hard for many people in your position to look down and say, "Oh, what the hell? So no big deal." But it is a big deal to many people, and that's about all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Sherman.
That speech was taken out of the Miriam Brody playbook. Remember Miriam? She's here.
I haven't seen
That was
her.
great.
She,
That was great. We got to get that on TV.
Okay.
Hi, Jenny Crowell,
Hi, Jenny.
69 Kimberly Circle. I had questions about the audit. I'm not going to ask them. It's too late. I'll email you and get just a couple of questions I had answered about that. But I think that my biggest concern about the budget process and how it's been working, I served on the Board of Ed for 6 years. And every year we came before you guys, gave you a number, and it was cut and go back and figure out how to rework the budget. And we had budget workshops before we met with the Board of Finance, and then budget workshops after you guys decided what the number was going to be. And over the last couple of years, it seems that this board just says, oh, if you're giving us a reasonable request, we're going to send it back. We're going to give it to you. And I do think that there is some value at looking at what they're asking for, because when I first started on the Board of Ed and we started reviewing numbers and you get these big line items, you don't know what's underneath them. And every single year they would say,
if we don't have this amount, we're gonna have to cut services. And time after time, you guys would cut, and Dr. Cronin would come back to us and say, but we're not touching student services. So I think the Board of Ed has sort of gotten into this mode where it's claiming that if we cut, we're cutting education. And I just want to point out a couple of things. There are currently 10 full-time coordinators. This is not administrators. This does not include the array of administrative staff. This is 10 full-time coordinators who are at the top of the salary scale, on top of it earning a stipend, who have 0 teaching responsibilities. And they've asked that part of what they asked for the increase was to add an 11th full-time. On top of it, they have 5 coordinators that have part-time teaching responsibilities. And all of those people are coordinating curriculum for 6 schools. My question is that really all necessary? And does that really impact at the classroom level? And when you're talking about many of those salaries are $100,000 a year, that's a significant amount of money. And I just think that there needs to be a little bit more conversation around what those things they're asking for and whether they're really benefiting the educational system. Because while the board has been getting their increases, we're asking the town on a regular basis to make up the difference in order to not have tax increases. And I think there needs to be a balance between the two. I am a huge supporter of education. Both of my parents were teachers. My sisters are teachers. I think, you know, the staff deserves raises, but I do think that that we should be looking at their budget a little bit more carefully. You certainly can't tell them where to cut, but I just think every single year for the last at least 3, I'm not sure how far back it goes, but there have not been any cuts to their budget, and they're not necessarily going to be, you know, clearly when I was on the board, they were able to find cuts, significant cuts, without impacting student services or student that would get down to the classroom level. So that's just one area I'd really like you guys to look at. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny.
Thank you very much. Very good.
Sal, are you done, or you want to come up?
Yeah, I'm done.
Oh, you're done?
No,
Oh, I thought she was done.
She's done organizing.
Mr. Chairman, Mrs. Barrett made a comment about last year's tax collection, which is on page 7, the current taxes. Check your year-end report, year-end revenue report, because it was that one line, the current taxes, was down $1 million. So just check your year-end report before you disagree with someone. And another thing, this budget dated March 15th, 2022, has the following new positions: 3 new police, 1 supernumerary, 2 new firefighters, 2 new positions in the finance office, the director of administration and the CPA. So that's 3 police, 1 supernumerary, 2 firefighters, 2 in finance, 1 engineer, 1 laborer, 1 collector, 1 manager of community and senior center, and 1 public works senior clerk, for a total of 13. So I think you owe Mrs. Barrett an apology for your childish, dirty look when she said there's 13 new.
What about the people that were eliminated?
There was 1 eliminated.
Yeah?
The
Look at
director of finance.
Director
Okay.
of finance.
Okay, the director of the senior center retired, but that's being
That
replaced.
position's still there.
Well, it's been transferred
Because the
as
title,
a community
because the title,
service. Excuse
because
me,
the
it's
title
public comment.
changed.
I'm finished my.
All right, then
No,
make
but,
public comment and
Okay,
then
well,
sit
there's
down.
13 new positions. 1 is a switch off. The director of senior center left, but now she's working part-time. And then there's a new $80,000+ community services senior center manager. So that kind of balances out. And so there are 13 new positions in this budget. So I just wanted to emphasize that. As far as the reduction of 0.47 in the mill rate the past 2 fiscal years, the current year it did go down. It went from 30 30.72 to 30.71, 1/100th of a mil, which saved the average taxpayer $2.50. The year before that, it did go down about a little bit more than 0.4. So if you take the 2 years, it's 0.4. 2 years ago was a reval, Mr. Chairman. You know, you've been around here long enough. You are misleading the public. Whenever there's a reval, the mill rate usually goes down. And it went down that year. And Mr. Johns, our assessor, said that even though the mill rate is going down, 1/3 of the taxpayers will have a higher tax burden because their reval went up a greater percentage than the mill rate did. 1/3 of the people would have the same tax burden because it didn't change, and 1/3 would be lower. So let's be careful when we talk about the tax rate the mill rate going down 0.47. One of those years, 2 years ago, was a reval, and it always goes down. So that is being very disingenuous to say.
Sally, if I can interrupt
Yes.
you for a second, since
Sure.
you call me disingenuous.
Yes.
What does the reval do as far as taxes are concerned?
It takes into account increases or decreases in property values, and then we adjust accordingly. Historically, the revals result in higher assessments for folks, and that's why the mill rate goes down. Correct?
No. No.
Then you haven't been paying attention the past 30 years.
The reval
Yeah.
does not increase or decrease taxes. All the reval does is shift the burden. So if you and my house are next to each other and they're the exact same house, and you're paying an assessment of 100, and I'm paying at 120, and mine goes down to 110, and yours goes up to 110, there's no change in taxes.
What I said was, in reval years, the mill rate routinely goes down. Right, but because of the reval
Change the
increase,
assessment.
if everybody's reval went up and you kept the mill rate the same, you'd be collecting a huge amount of money, which is why typically in reval years, the mill rate goes down, because you don't need such a high mill rate to meet the budgetary obligations.
The mill
That has
rate
been-
is
when I was on the
determined by the expenses.
Right.
The
right.
expenses.
But-
Has nothing to do with reval. Reval only shifts the burden between the residents. If your house was under reval and your neighbor was over reval, his goes down, yours goes up. It doesn't do anything to taxes.
2 years ago was a reval year, and the mill rate went down because of the reval. Plain and simple. That's a fact. The reval always makes the mill rate change a little fuzzy. Mr. Frieda has acknowledged that publicly as well as I have. So let me just remind the folks at home that there was a reval 2 years ago, and that had a dramatic impact on the mill rate. I understand what you're saying about shifting burdens,
By the
but
way,
it does affect the mill rate.
The grand list went up $1 million.
I'm sorry?
The grand list went up $1 million between 2018 and 2019.
Okay, but the reval was 2 years ago.
The reval you're saying was in 2019, you said?
No.
That is the right year.
It
says right here, reval
but
completed in 2019.
It affected not the current budget, but the one before. So we're currently in 21-22. It affected the 2021 budget.
Continue with your comments.
Yeah, I want a little bit of a clarification on, with Mr. Frieda, on the use of ARPA to balance the budget, because tonight you said that no ARPA money was used to attain that $215,000 surplus that was reflected on your executive summary. When you were asked how much ARPA money was used to balance the 2021 budget, which ended last year, you said none. Tonight. Is that true?
So, on this, did you get a copy of the sheet here?
No.
Okay. So on that sheet, you will see no ARPA funds that were added in to balance the budget.
Okay, because at the February 16th, 2022 meeting of the Board of Finance, and I was here, and I heard it, and I always re-listen, I watch it on the internet. At minute 30, Mrs. Barrett asked, did we use ARPA funds to balance 2021? And your answer was, quote, no ARPA other than what was already in the budget ending June 30th. So what did you mean by that? I'm still confused by that statement from last month. Because I thought that implied that some ARPA money, because you said no ARPA other than what was already in the budget. And I came to public comment and I said, that didn't make sense to me because there was no ARPA in the budget, but we received ARPA during the budget year.
Right.
So I'm having trouble reconciling that quote, sir, with what you said tonight, that no ARPA funds were used.
So
Was there a change since February?
No, so when we looked at the final numbers, the difference between revenue and expenses from the sheets that he referred to, that the Board of Finance got at the end of June of 2021, that was the basis for us to balance this budget. What we did, if you look at these sheets here, we mapped it out so that we didn't utilize any ARPA money in this mapping. We used MRSA. There were encumbrances that were added back in that weren't spent. There was $400,000 that he explained in terms of the fact that there was a revenue number of $109 million in those sheets that were passed out at the end of June of 2021.
Yeah.
So he took me through how we could capture credit for the encumbrances, the $400,000, the project transfer, and the $400,000 being in the revenue between the adopted budget and what our revenue showed.
Okay.
So we didn't use any ARPA funds on this mapping that he presented tonight. No
Okay.
ARPA funds.
All right. I didn't have the advantage of seeing any of these documents. Perhaps your executive assistant can email them to me tomorrow, or if you have a set
Yeah, I'll give it to
of
you later,
copies,
so.
you can hand them to. But you understand why I'm having a
Yeah.
problem reconciling what you said last month
I understand.
versus what you said tonight. It's just-
No, just the second page.
Yeah.
That page.
This
only.
page, right. So you're not going to see any ARPA funds on this mapping to balance this budget that got us to the $215,000 that I presented at the last Board of Finance meeting, okay?
All right.
Okay.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
I've been on the Board of Selectmen for 8 years, and I can only think of 2 fiscal years that we used any of the contingency fund, including this year, because in December, this board unanimously passed a resolution for $174,600 to be allocated from contingency for an emergency recycling vehicle. And then in 2014, we used about $160,000 to purchase a medical rescue unit because it broke down on the way to a call. I can't think of any other time that we ever used anything from
We used it to buy
contingency.
a payloader, that storm we had.
Contingency? Okay. All right, well, I stand corrected. So 3 out of 8 years. I think we could leave the
That's the one
contingency
I can
alone.
think of. I remember that
Yeah,
one.
was it, and you're sure it wasn't MRSA, sir?
No, when we had the heavy storm, actually, the only way we could buy it was as an emergency preparation out of contingency off the state contracting list.
That was, are
Pre-bid
you talking
list.
about that vacuum thing? Because we did a lease for that.
Big payloader.
Big payloader.
When we had the,
How much did it
We had that
cost?
50-some odd inches of
no, we
snow?
had 32.
32?
Well, that was in
Hey,
2013.
you know what? Yeah. No,
Do I hear 40? I don't know.
it was more than 32.
That was in 2013, so that's before my time, sir.
So you want
I
to
was,
keep it the same?
yeah, that, what you're talking about was in 2013, in February was that storm. I didn't come along till, happily for you, till November of 13. So I'm going to stick with what I said. Only 2 years out of the 8 that I've been here have we used the contingency fund. So I think we're safe at 300,000. And it's very late. I know you keep staring at the clock. I will not support any budget that has a mill rate increase. Thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Can I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. We're adjourned.
The preceding program is brought to you in part through a grant from the town of North Haven. Watch town meetings or other videos on demand at nhtv.com.